going.
All right.
You're all set.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jim Dill. I'm the Senate Chair for our ACF, Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. And we've got 4 public hearings today. And then first we have a briefing on equity. So what I'll do is I'll go around and we'll have an introductions from our committee. And then I'll turn it over to Representative O'Neill for the first section on equity. So with that, I'll go right across my screen, and the first one I see is Representative Hall.
Yes, good morning. Representative Randy Hall from District 114, 6 towns in southern Franklin County.
Representative O'Neill.
Sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Maggie O'Neill, and I represent House District 15, which is Saco.
Representative Landry.
Good morning, Representative Scott Landry from Farmington. I represent New Sharon and Farmington, District 113.
Senator Maxman.
Hi, I'm Chloe Maxman. I represent Senate District 13, which is all of Lincoln County except for Dresden, plus Washington and Windsor, 27 towns in the Mid-Coast.
Thank you. Senator Black.
Good morning, Senator Black, representing Senate District 17, which is all of Franklin County and 4 towns in Kennebec.
Representative Osher.
Good morning, I'm Lori Osher. I represent District 123, which is the majority of Orono, the home of the University of Maine.
Representative Pluker.
Hey, I'm Bill Pluker. I'm from Warren. I also represent Hope, Appleton, and part of Union, House District 95.
Representative Schofield.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Senator Dill. I'm Tom Schofield, and I represent House District 112. I live in the great little town of Weld, Maine, up here in Franklin County, and I represent 17 towns and townships in Somerset and Franklin counties, the High Peaks region of Maine.
Thank you. And again, as I said, I'm Jim Dill. I represent Senate District number 5, Northern Penobscot County. And with that, Representative O'Neill, I will turn it over to you for the first section this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think I'll be brief, but we set up a conversation to just be sort of a framing conversation about equity. We have 3 speakers today that I'm really grateful that came and are giving us our time. So I'm going to ask that when we've arranged an order and when they come up, just to introduce themselves, their organization and background, and then you'll hear from each for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of time for questions. So thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to Chris, who's first up.
Hi, good morning, committee members. Thank you so much for the invitation. So happy to be here today. My name is Chris Newell, and I'm the Executive Director and Senior Partner to Wabanaki Nations for the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor, Maine. I was born and raised in Washington County in the community of Medocnigook, otherwise known as Indian Township. And I'm a second-generation Passamaquoddy educator. My father, Wayne Newell, not an unknown name to people that work in education in the state of Maine, as somebody that I grew up watching do this work and kind of migrated to it naturally. So my presentation today is really focused on the Indigenous landscape and the Indigenous history of this land. You know, one of the things that often happens even with the adults that I run into in my education career is, you know, the public school system oftentimes, and still happens to this day, begins the historical historical timeline with European exploration, and it kind of jumps over the 13,000 plus years of occupation of Native people on the landscape that we now call the state of Maine. And I'll be talking a little bit about the history of Wabanaki peoples, who we are, how we see the land, and give you some good terminology when speaking, about our communities and also about our landscape as well. So one of the things that I open up with constantly is that, I'll be presenting this presentation in the English language, and I only have 20 minutes to do it, and I'm usually used to talking for an hour, so I apologize for that if I seem a little bit rushed. I do want to stay on time and make sure we give equal time to all of our speakers here today. So, but yeah, I just wanted to start there. The English language is a foreign language to this land, and when describing the history of land and land use, it really, if you use English language terminology, you're really using the worldview of the land of England back in the 17th century and before. And that's one of the downfalls of having to use English to discuss indigenous terminologies and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of go over the English language terminology and what we can do just as human beings to engage with our Wabanaki homelands a little bit better. So I'll get into my presentation here. I want to take up too much time here and make sure I keep moving. So yes, Wabanaki homelands. Just a short summary of how the land came to be in our cosmology, our collective cosmologies here. And this is not the story. And it's referred to as a Sky Woman story. It is told differently by different tribes throughout the Northeast, and even the Haudenosaunee, or otherwise known as the Iroquois Confederacy people, have their own version of this story. So this is a very short summation of a version of the story that we tell. But the creation of the world, basically, creation of North America. And just very shortly here, I'll read this to you. In the beginning, Mother Earth, and that's very important that you hear that, in our cosmology, we see what people would refer to as the land as a maternal force, a force that gives life. And that's very important because we see that throughout all of it. In fact, our word for what we would translate in the English language as dirt, dupguan, actually translates better as the molecules of our ancestors. And so, as indigenous peoples, as Native peoples on this landscape here and never being removed, we literally see, the cycle of life and know the science of it and realize that all of the soil includes the molecules of our ancestors. So to go on with the story, the turtle was the first to help her, allowing her to ride on her shell. The animals worked together to retrieve soil from the bottom of the ocean, which Mother Earth used to build her home on the turtle shell. By spreading the soil across the shell, she forced it to grow to a great size, creating mountains, valleys, plains, etc. in the process. In this way, Mother Earth built Turtle Island, and that's one of the words or phrases that we use to refer to North America, Turtle Island, which is now known as North America. Later on, Mother Earth would give birth to Glooskap, who is our cultural hero, who is responsible for creating the Wabanaki peoples and giving us our name, and also Malsum, who was sent down with him, his twin brother born with the head of a wolf, and actually taught us a lot of things that we shouldn't be doing as people, as Bamasa-Winamuk, as human beings on this earth. And eventually reincarnated, Mother Earth reincarnated as Glooskap's grandmother, the woodchuck. And that goes once again into cultural ideas spread amongst the Wabanaki nations throughout Maine and the Maritimes, that, the elder women in our communities achieved the highest social stature by far. Even when the French Catholics came to our communities in Passamaquoddy territory, the churches that were built, whether they were initially Indian missions and now now they're considered full parishes. But the Indian missions that they were built, the communities in Zibayag, Pleasant Point, and Madocmigook Indian Township, both chose to name the churches after the patron saint, Saint Anne, who is the mother of Mary or the grandmother of Jesus. So one of the things I always talk about is that even with the effects of colonization, the Catholics brought their religion to us and we accepted it. But one of the things that happened with my ancestors is they actually indigenized the Catholic religion, and it is practiced slightly differently within our own home communities, even to this day. Our sense of place, once again, just want to normalize this, and I repeat it several times in all my presentations, that the English language is a foreign language and therefore can never accurately describe the homelands of Wabanaki peoples. English language often labels things, and sometimes those labels can be arbitrary when it comes to naming of a place, and often has a reference to a person who discovered or founded an area. And once again, that goes back to that idea of the timeline beginning with European arrival to this land. And then there's town names all over, English-derived river names, and even the state of Maine itself. That name Maine is once again an homage to a discoverer or a founder. Wabanaki place names are relational. The way our languages work, Algonquin dialects are relational to one another. They are not into creating labels for things. And so usually the names of land areas are descriptors of the landscape itself and how a particular part of the landscape relates to what surrounds it. And a great example of that is one that we all know, and I use this example just because it's so familiar, is Katahdin, which translates in our languages different ways, but means generally the great mountain or the greatest mountain. So just for all of you here, if you are looking at an English language map of the state of Maine, you will see Mount Katahdin. And to people that speak our languages in Wabanaki territory, it sounds like you're saying mountain, great mountain. And that's one of the things I try to update for people's language is Katahdin. Just referring it to as Katahdin is actually the proper way to refer it. And most Mainers are actually well ahead of the game when it comes to that, and actually do refer to it as that. The same is true for Wabanaki names of other peoples. When it comes to our term Wenuch, which we translate as a white person or a French person, depending on how it's used, the etymology of that word actually originates with a question, which would translate more as who are you and where do you come from? And you think about the times of first encounters, they were encountering what they call, our ancestors, what they called hairy-faced men. And so they came up with this term as a way to describe. And then a word for, we didn't have words for Native peoples or Native Americans or, just generalizing all Native peoples under one umbrella term. This had to get developed. And the word that came out in the Passamaquoddy language that we use is Skijin or Skijinwug, which is, now we translate as a Native person, but really the origination of that is surface dweller. And once again, it's a relational term in regards to Europeans who are arriving on ships, and when they first arrived, were living on those ships, living on the water. So that was a way to demarcate the difference between us. Wabanaki nations, just so you know who we have here today. In 2021, there are 5 tribes in the US and Canada that collectively make up the Wabanaki peoples. They are the Passamaquoddy, which is my people, comes from the word Pescadamugati, which means it's people who spear pollock, and that refers to our seasonal migration to the mouth of Scudig, otherwise known as the St. Croix River, the current international border between Maine and Canada. The Penobscot, that comes from Bunawabskeg, which is actually a name for where Indian Island is, the place where the rocks open out, that particular spot on the river. Maliseet is actually not the name that they use for themselves in their own language. As explorers, traveled throughout the region, sometimes they would ask other tribes who these people are, and this is an example of that happening. In our language, Maliseet means they speak slowly. So that's once again a relational term, another group of Native peoples, giving that name to early explorers. But Maliseet peoples actually call themselves Wolastoquihig, people of the beautiful river, or which is the name of their homestake river, Wolastoq, which might is a definite derivation of what we now call Aroostook. Abenaki peoples is a French derivation of Wabanaki, Abenaqua, depending on the time period, generally referring to peoples of the Don, and then the Mi'kmaq or Micmac people, depending on which side of the border you're on, an all-encompassing term for the tribes of the Eastern Maritime. Over history, they were called Gaspesians, Iroquois, Acadians, Tarantines. Their name for themselves is Elnu, which translates to the people. Wabanaki, what does it mean? Wabanaki is actually the anglicized, the English language version of the term the tribes use for self-identification. While each tribe and community is different and has slightly different languages and their own self-governed body, Wabanaki people share a common cosmology and a belief in a creation from a being, a cultural hero named Gluskap or Gluskabe, depending on the tribe, who was the one that created us from the ash trees and gave us our name, named us in Passamaquoddy as Chiquapanakig, which is the people of the place where the sun first looks our way. And one of the things that he did, he taught us our life ways. And when he left, he ordered us to remain in the land of the dawn forever. And thankfully, we were never removed from our home landscapes, and we still exist there today. So what does this have to do with the land when it comes to, conservation, forestry? This is just some mapping that I'm going to show you here. This is, from nativeland.ca, which is kind of a crowdsourced mapping of indigenous landscapes prior to colonization. And this is the region which includes what is now the state of Maine, but all of Chiquapanakig, or the land of the dawn here, and all of the tribes that are included. And as you can see, our borderlands were not lines, right? They were actually very much overlapped with one another. And we traveled throughout the entire region, all the way down even to what is now the state of Connecticut, to the Long Island Sound region, to trade for things like wampum, which we use to preserve our histories and to make laws and other things with belts. This is a map that, includes the colonial borders that we all use these days. So you can kind of see where Maine is situated within the land of the dawn here. And so Maine is actually part of a larger indigenous landscape, and it's really part of a natural landscape here. Just drawing an international border through that line does not change the fact that different landscapes are attached to each other by water. And therefore, when it comes to agriculture, conservation, and forestry, we got to think about the connection between our lands and the connections by water to the lands that are over the other side of the border. And that is something that our ancestors have always done throughout history. And we typically separated our territories by rivers. And use the landscape in a way where we did not change or improve. That's something that the English brought with them. Now we use the word development when we talk about, the work that we do. But those English language terms put a positive spin on it. But the first step of any improvement or development under the English language terminology of what that is actually a destruction of the land first, and a destruction of its ability to produce or sustain life, its maternal force, its natural way of being. This map right here is in the Abbey Museum, and I love this map because what it does is it once again shows Chiquapanakig, the land of the dawn here, without the colonial borders. And you can see once again that when you look at it this way, you can see how well connected all the waterways are. Our ancestors, even as just 100 years ago, Passamaquoddy and Penobscot chiefs were invited down to the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts for the 300th anniversary of the Mayflower landing. When they went, they did not go by car or by truck or by train. They went by canoe, and they did so coming all the way from areas like Scudig, the St. Croix River, Bonawapskig, the Penobscot River here, and traveling down waterways, rivers, using known portages and coastal routes to get all the way down to Plymouth, Massachusetts, down here in the south. And these were well-known routes that had been carried through centuries of knowledge of this entire landscape here. And you can see familiar names, Gaspé, which we now call the Gaspé Peninsula, and even over here on the very left where the St. Lawrence River widens out is what in our dialects is known as Quebec, which is where the river ends. So essentially where the St. Lawrence River widens out here, that's where an area we call Quebec, and that is where Quebec City is currently located. And just to once again give you a landscape of the modern day Wabanaki communities. Peter, there's 5 remaining communities. There was at one time over 22 different tribes that would have been known to make up the Wabanaki peoples. Colonization does happen, disease does happen. Our numbers have been greatly reduced. And in the state of Maine, we have 5 living native communities representing 4 of the Wabanaki tribes. 2 are Passamaquoddy. One is Peter Dana Point in Indian Township, which is my home community, Mandaknibuk, which translates to where the land slopes down to meet the water. Pleasant Point is Zibayig, as you can see on the map there, next to Eastport, which translates to along the shoreline. And that is the traditional headquarters on the American side of our peoples when we would travel down there for our yearly migration to fish. St. Andrews, I bring this in there because, it's amazing that the Canadian government has not recognized the Passamaquoddy people that have always traditionally lived on the other side of the river, as if we only lived on the American side. And just recently, the St. Andrews community, Gwinasquamcook, is finally getting recognition as a Passamaquoddy community, and that translates to the Sandy Point. Holton, Madaxanagiak, you guys might know the river as Madaxnakeg. That is from a Passamaquoddy Maliseet term that refers to the river portage in Holton, which has hard, sharp rocks, and so that term translates to hard on the shoes. Indian Island is known as the People's Island to them in Penobscot. And then Odanak is located in Quebec. That is the Abenaki, one of the Abenaki communities. And in our language in Passamaquoddy, Udeneg means town or village. And that's really where that name would derive from, the St. Francis band. So there are other resources that you can dig into this a little bit more, but I would encourage you that as you consider your work going into the future, to always consider the indigenous landscape and the indigenous knowledge, the 13,000 years of knowledge that our people have had in this area. When colonization arrived, the first thing they came for was the fish. And then the next thing they came for was the wood. And so the state of Maine only has less than 5% old growth forest. When Europeans arrived here, the trees were so large that it would take 5 colonists with their arms stretched out fingertip to fingertip to go around the circumference of the trees. That's how large they were. And the Wabanaki peoples that lived on this landscape used and worked the land in order to get all the materials that we needed to sustain life. Food, clothing, and shelter were supplied. And it's said in our history that at that time there was so much food that nobody could starve. It was impossible to do so. And so the effects of colonization have changed things. And so one of the things that I would hope that you would look to do in the future is to guarantee that we take care of this maternal force, the earth, in this landscape that we now call the state of Maine, and consider how it connects to the bordering landscapes that we all are part of to this day. So I will leave it there for you, ladies and gentlemen. I will send this PowerPoint to Representative O'Neill, and she can pass it out to you as a PDF for those of you that would like to refer to it in the future. And hopefully I did not go over time too badly. Looks like I did okay. So I am going to turn it over back to Representative O'Neill. I can't remember who's next.
Hi there. Sorry, little technical difficulty getting started here. My name is Kate McMahon. I am a museum specialist at the Center for the Study of Global Slavery at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm a Mainer as well. I grew up in Shapley, which is in York County. And I'm going to talk today about Maine slavery and the slave trade. And this is a really important topic that is not very well understood in the state of Maine. So I'm going to start while I talk with just playing this video, which I hope works. Yes. This, I know it's probably pretty small on your screen. Each dot in this video is a slave ship. So you'll notice they increase in number greatly over time. So I'm going to briefly talk about the history of the slave trade. What do we mean by a global slave trade? The slave trade truly was a global enterprise that completely shaped the world as we know it. we have in the state of Maine little understanding of our relationship to global slavery and how deeply ingrained slavery was in every aspect of our state's economy. Slavery and the expansion of slavery throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries drove economic expansion. It drove colonialism, displacement of indigenous peoples across the world. And it was a true driver of the Industrial Revolution. It was the gas in the engine that drove the Industrial Revolution. You know, we have a series of coinciding events that happen in 1400 with the beginnings of European exploration and colonial takeover of North and South America, as well as other parts of the world. At the same time, there was an increasing development in ship technology that allowed easy access to Africa, which had not been the case prior to about 1500, where they had difficulty crossing the Gulf Stream. Over the course of the transatlantic slave trade, we know that at least 12.5 million Africans were taken out of Africa to go into New World slavery. About 1.8 million people died during the Middle Passage, which is an average mortality rate of about 14.5%. This is a huge human toll. There are times when the mortality rate aboard these vessels is over 30%, and on some vessels it's 100%. And this caused massive changes in the demographics of Africa, especially since the majority of enslaved people that were taken out of Africa were men. Men were preferred 2 to 1 over women, and therefore the consequences of having very few marriageable men in Africa and generations of population loss were extreme. So in Maine, slavery really started with indigenous enslavement. And it's important to note that what Chris was talking about, this moment of interaction between the Europeans and indigenous people in Maine and across New England and the East Coast of the United States, started with the enslavement of indigenous people. Beginning in the colonial period, particularly after the King Philip's War, indigenous people were routinely transported to be enslaved on Caribbean sugar plantations. And Maine had deep connections to slavery in the Caribbean, beginning in the colonial period. Men like William Pepperell, who was, of course, a fairly well-known Saco, Biddeford resident, York County resident and businessman, had deep investments in sugar plantations in Antigua and other places in the Caribbean, and regularly purchased and sold enslaved people between his home in New England and the Caribbean. And with this, of course, is the relationship to the rum trade as well, which I'll get to a little bit more later. The first enslaved person that is known, enslaved African that is known, arrived by 1663 when a deed in York gave, from a man named Thomas Bolt, gave his son-in-law, quote, a Negro boy named Mingo. By 1715, there were approximately 2,000 enslaved people in the colony of Massachusetts Bay. And by 1775, there were approximately 3,500 enslaved people living in Massachusetts and 629 in New Hampshire. In New York, in 1775, by comparison, there were approximately 15,000 enslaved people in the state. So there was a relatively smaller population of enslaved people that were much more spread out between households, and tended to not be engaged in the large-scale agricultural production that we see in plantation economies, but rather many of them were skilled laborers, carpenters, seamstresses, people, artisans that really worked and helped build New England. And you see two documents here related to William Pepperell. And the document in the background that you're looking at is his will. And you see the top couple of lines are related to purchasing items for his captives, a man named George. So slavery was relatively small in the state of Maine. Slavery was abolished by the state of Massachusetts in 1784 after two enslaved people sued the state of Massachusetts over the constitutionality of slavery in the state of Massachusetts related to the new constitution that was established after the American Revolution. These are two examples of just the brutality of enslavement in the state of Maine. And I'm not going to go deeply into slavery in the state today because I want to focus on Maine and the slave trade and the slave economies. So the slave trade is a complex history, a global history. The document on the left-hand side is a document from the Maine Historical Society. It's the cargo of the ship Eagle. Early in 1791, Thomas Hodges, who was the son-in-law and agent to Thomas Robeson of Portland, boarded a French ship, bringing with him a cargo of 30 enslaved people from Robeson's ship, the Eagle. Hodges crossed the Atlantic to Acais Hispaniola, present-day Les Cayes, Haiti, and leaving the Eagle in the care of its captain. While this American ship actually could not legally bring enslaved people to sell into the French colony, the French ship La Jarime could bring Hodges' captives on shore without consequence. So Mainers were beginning, in this period of the slave trade to find all methods around their the illegal participation in the slave trade. We have a broad misunderstanding of the slave trade, I think, in New England generally. We like to talk about our glorious shipbuilding history, our clipper ships, the age of sail, and we extol this, but we remove all of the complexities of what the age of sail actually meant for Black and brown people globally. So, the age of sail was deeply fueled by the slave trade. Ships, the shipbuilding technology that we love to uphold, part of the reason why these ships were being preferred was because they were fast and they could outrun naval ships searching for people participating in the slave trade. In Maine, we have very few programs in college that allow students to learn African-American, African diaspora history. And there are very few opportunities to engage with this history in an upper level course. So one aspect of this history that is deeply misunderstood in Maine is Maine's participation in the illegal slave trade. So the United States barred American participation in the slave trade in 1808, following the UK, who had barred it in 1807. Some vessels did land in the United States proper illegally after 1808. They did land some cargoes of enslaved people. There are the most famous one is the slave ship Clotilda, which was built by actually a Mainer named Thomas Maher, who had moved to Mobile and bet a Confederate in 1861 at a bar that he could smuggle a cargo of enslaved Africans into Mobile Bay, despite the embargoes and patrols that were happening across the country. And he did so. And the Clotilda was burned. A number of the enslaved people were sold upriver. Of course, the Emancipation Proclamation happened a short time later. And there's a strong descendant community in Africatown, Alabama now related to that group of people that landed on the Clotilda. So there's a few reasons why Maine ships in particular were being privileged during the period of the illegal slave trade, which I'm going to get to in a second. These vessels, there were a lot of reasons why they did not land too many that we know of vessels in the United States proper. The majority of slave trading that was happening after 1808 was Americans participating in the slave trade elsewhere. So landing enslaved people in Cuba, in Brazil, in these other places across the United States. This image of the ship you see on the right is the brig Kentucky, which was built in down east, and it was a vessel that was used in 1845 to transport enslaved people from Mozambique to Brazil on behalf of a Brazilian slave trader. It carried over 600 captive Africans, and there was a severe shipboard revolt aboard the vessel, and 60 people were murdered by the crew as a result of this journey. So American ships were beginning in the 1820s, increasingly involved in the participation in the illegal slave trade. After 1820, the Act of 1820 essentially made participation in the slave trade a capital offense. It was a series of subsequent legislation because the period between 1808 and 1820, it was completely lawless. There was no, while the law barred participation, the United States government didn't really build in any enforcement into the law. And so therefore, or penalty into the law. So therefore, people just continued to operate wildly during this time period, and continue to increase, actually. And even after 1820, it increases at an extremely rapid rate, particularly the participation of New Englanders in this trade. And I know this image on the right, this table is really hard to see on screen, so I'll also send my PDF of this out after. But with my research, I've been looking at Maine vessels particularly engaged in the slave trade to Brazil and Cuba between 1840 and 1865. And what I've discovered is that Maine ships were preferred over ships from anywhere else in the world. So the vast majority of vessels that were entering the Cuban slave market in the 1850s were from Maine. The captains and the crews were majority from New England as well. And so far I have been able to capture that approximately 18,000 people were transported by Maine vessels to Cuba to severely horrific conditions aboard Cuban sugar plantations in the 1850s. I only have data for about half of the known voyages, and it's important to note that most of these voyages I know about because they were captured. So I see the tip of the iceberg. There's an iceberg under here somewhere that will never know the true scale of the involvement of New England in this horrific trade. Just to give you some figures, the average price of a person in the Cuban slave market was about $400 at the time, or about $12,000 in today's currency. So the net profit for an owner of a ship in Maine was about 3.1 on average, $3.1 million per journey. Was flowing back to these various groups, these various merchants and ship owners, and these men were some of our most notable citizens. It was a true building block for the Maine economy. To put this into perspective, Maine's timber industry was valued at $2.5 million per year in 1852. That means that the slave fleet was almost 4 times more valuable than our timber industry. And of course, our timber industry was also involved in this economy as well. Lumber was frequently being transported to trade in Africa, to trade in the Caribbean, etc. And of course, the ships themselves were built out of lumber. And so all of this money is deeply wrapped into Maine's economy. And you can see here this newspaper article on the bottom right discussing the fact that Boston and New England capital and the Eastern people on board these vessels that were being captured in ports across the world, trading enslaved people. And there's, of course, a whole other aspect of this, which is the legal domestic U.S. slave trade, which is moved at least 4 million people were moved between the Upper South and the Lower South over the course of the period of the domestic slave trade, primarily between 1808 and 1863. Mainers were also deeply involved in this portion of the legal slave trade. So what you see here are 2 manifests for slave ships that were owned by Rufus Soule of Freeport. These vessels, each line on the image is a different person. And you see, this is a woman with her 2 children, aged 6 and 1, that were being transported aboard this vessel from Charleston to New Orleans, and were sold into the Deep South to become part of the labor force that was also displacing indigenous people as the West was cleared and was being settled by the white people. So Rufus Soule, briefly, is a good case study in an average merchant's participation in slavery and the slave economies. So Rufus Soule is primarily known in the town of Freeport as being a merchant who traded cotton and sugar and those sorts of things. Well, he also transported enslaved people aboard these vessels along with the cotton, and some of his ships, at least one, were also involved in the illegal slave trade. On July 6, 1858, the Rufus Soule, which was registered out of New Orleans, was consigned to a notorious slave dealer in Matanzas, Cuba, Cristobal Valdez, for about $5,000, which was a huge fee, about twice as much for a vessel of this size. And it was eventually captured along with another schooner named the Kate Ellen from Plymouth, off of the coast of Cabenda Bay, Angola, having been suspected in the slave trade. They didn't stop the vessel. The vessel eventually made it to Cuba, sold 400 people into slavery, and then the vessel was burned in Cuba. And this is a very common thing. Many of those vessels on that spreadsheet end up the same way. And so I really think that, the Maine's involvement in the slave trade needs a lot more deep introspection and understanding of not just how directly people were involved in slavery, but how the slave economies propped up our mills, our merchant houses, our banks, how it built our cities and our towns, and also how it built systemic racism into much of our governance structure. So I think I pass it on to Ian.
Thank you, Dr. McMahon. I'm sorry I lost internet earlier and didn't have the chance to thank Mr. Newell as well. I'll pass it to Mr. Yaffe.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be with you today, and it's very humbling to be following Chris and Kate here. So I think before I start, I'm here. My name is Ian Yaffe, and I'm the Executive Director of Mano & Mano. I'm here to talk about the work that we do with farm workers. And I think before I start, I have a pretty brief presentation, and I just want to connect. I would like to establish how important the history of this land and of slavery that you've heard, and how interconnected this all is. I think at times, Maine and the government and our education system tends to really only think about the past 200 years or the past 50 years. And these things are all so interconnected. They're so much dependent on each other to how we have landed at today. So I'm going to share my screen and I will talk a little bit about this work. And it says that it failed to start, so I'm going to try one more time. Does that work for everyone? Do you see just the slides now? Okay, perfect. So Mano and Mano is based in Millbridge in Washington County. Over the past 100 years, at least, I'm trying to ground a little bit in the demographics that I'm sure that many are familiar with, that Maine has a declining population, and that this is especially pronounced in the rural regions of Maine where agriculture is based. For example, another version of this is looking at the population by age, and you can see that not only is the population still declining, that the amount of younger cohorts make up smaller and smaller percentages of the population as a whole, which points to a continued future decline. This is another way of looking at it with a relative percentage change, and the highlight here that I would show, which is where Mano and Mano begins its journey, is in the late 1990s and early 2000s as a group of migrant workers moved permanently to Washington County to stay year-round. There has been migration in the region for a very long time, since before Maine existed or was even an idea, as Chris was talking about with some of the Mi'kmaq and Passamaquoddy historical and cultural migrations that have happened, and that I think at times the state tends to try to classify this as agricultural work or farm work, and it's more nuanced than that. In the late 1980s, primarily Latinx farm workers began working in Maine. This corresponds with a time period of a shortened harvest and pay stagnation. And in the early 2000s, families begin to move to the Millbridge area, and Mano is established in 2005. We work with year-round community members in the Millbridge area. There are about 400 immigrant and Latinx community members who call the Millbridge area home year-round. And we also work with seasonal farm workers across the state, in particularly the blueberry industry, seafood processing, and broccolis up in Aroostook County. The map on the left is from a project at the Blueberry Harvest School. And this is just an example of where families and individuals are coming from. This is the journey that brings them together during Maine's wild blueberry harvest. At Mano and Mano, we often talk about community strengths and systemic deficits. And so we believe that farm workers and the communities that they are a part of and the identities that they share are sources of strengths, and that there are systemic deficits that prevent farm workers from thriving here in Maine. Some of the things that are most important to us include community leadership and advocacy, the community and parents' role in education, the role of celebrating language, culture, and identity, and protecting farm worker and immigrant justice and rights. Throughout the year, we try to do our best to actually welcome farm workers and migrant workers to this region, and to ensure that they know that there is appreciation for them being here. There are a ton of barriers to success. This includes availability and affordability of housing, especially when farm worker housing is so tied to employers. Institutional and agency barriers to accessing resources based on, in particular, racism, immigration status, language. Farm worker pay stagnation since the 70s, as well as the lack of inclusion in legal labor protections. So for example, farm workers in Maine under state and federal law, so this is things that both the legislator and Congress have to act on. farm workers are exempt from protections that most workers have. And that includes the minimum wage, overtime, and the right to collective bargaining. And I'm certainly not here to lecture this committee on the struggle of farmers and farm workers. And I would say that there still is a position that Maine as a state takes and the US as a country takes, that farm workers are worthy of less protection than other workers. Other barriers include language accessibility, the way the public education system is funded, immigration policy, and a lot of the policies that come out that are sort of race neutral, meaning that they tend to benefit white people, or language neutral, which means that they tend to benefit people who speak English. So that is the end of the slideshow that I have, and I'm just going to return my screen. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see each other. There are a couple other pieces that I wanted to talk about here. One was a report from Dr. Vaishali Mamgain in 2013, who talks about the contribution of migrant workers to the blueberry industry. In that report, she certainly talks about the demographics of Washington and Aroostook counties, and how farm workers are largely still invisible to Maine's 1.3 million year-round residents. She also talks about the full-time average median earnings, and I think it's important for this committee to understand. In general, we're talking about full-time workers earning between $2,000 and $22,000 per year. And I think this committee probably understands that that's very difficult to survive on, despite the essential role that agriculture plays in our economy. It's also pretty well understood that the role of migrant workers and of farm workers is essential to agriculture. Many employers don't like to talk about it, but because of how political all of this has become. But without migrant workers at this particular moment in time, because of all of the history that we've been through, Maine's agriculture industry wouldn't exist. Some employers in this report have talked about how if migrant workers stop coming, they would just stop commercial production. They would just have a farm stand, and that they would have to shut down because our jobs depend on their labor. And so I think what I would ask this committee is to think about the ways in which you can envision the future of agriculture in Maine, a future where workers have equitable opportunity for success in this system. Some of the points of light that I wanted to share with you are with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida, and across the border in Vermont with an organization called Migrant Justice, who are working with legislatures, with growers, and most importantly with workers, to establish new systems to ensure that agriculture work has dignity and that there are protections. Some of the statistics that came out of Vermont, which are similar to that in Maine, but that they don't exist for Maine, are that 40% of farm workers are paid less than the minimum wage, 40% have no days off, 30% routinely work more than 7 hours without a break. 20% have their pay illegally withheld. 15% don't have more than 8 hours in a row off to sleep. 15% live in overcrowded housing and have inadequate heat. And there are solutions to all of this. It's really just a choice. Lastly, before I continue, and I'm sure that you have lots of questions for all three of us, I just wanted to highlight one of the emerging opportunities that the legislature in Maine has to address some of the effects of historical racism and genocide and colonization, which is the Permanent Commission on the Status of Racial, Indigenous, and Tribal Populations. This is a unique commission that doesn't have a parallel in the country. And it's also a commission that's new and that requires your attention for funding. there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight. I know that I've worked with many of you, and you have worked with the commission over the past summer to demonstrate the impact of some of this work of coming together to really look at racial impact and racial justice as a foundational path to move forward, and something that will benefit all of us. The commission is independent. It has the capacity to advise 3 branches of government. It honors inherent sovereignty of our tribal members by having all 4 of the recognized tribes at the moment have the ability to elect their own representatives and serve as a member of this commission. So I hope that as you continue your work this year, that you'll consider the history that Chris and Kate have shared with you, how there is so much work to be done, and how this year is a pivotal opportunity for this committee and for the legislature to begin to take action to right some of the historical wrongs and to begin to see justice in agriculture, in conservation, and in forestry. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Yaffe, and thank you to all presenters. This was really helpful for me and informative, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. I want to open up for questions. Anyone on the committee had a question? Representative Fluker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for each. Should I do them one at a time, or do you want to give other people a chance to ask questions in between my questions?
I think one at a time is great. Yeah, and go ahead.
Well, I'll start with Mr. Newell, or Dr. Newell. I don't know his title. I wanted to ask about the role of agriculture within the Wabanaki Nation community, and how land access has impacted historically the role of agriculture in your communities, and today, how we kind of see how that plays out nowadays.
So when it comes to tribal histories and agriculture, it's mostly seen in what is now Western Maine and Southern Maine. The Abenaki tribes especially were heavily involved with agriculture as part of their yearly food cycle, and the northern tribes to the east, Passamaquoddies, less so. But even so, the Abenakis practiced a style of farming that began all the way in what is now Mexico, which is complementary farming. Otherwise known as Three Sisters farming. And that style of farming of growing corn, beans, and squash together, the plants will complement one another. You will yield larger crops. You will deplenish the soil at a much, much, much slower rate. And it will also stop erosion. And also just nutritionally, corn, beans, and squash, if you eat those 3 vegetables together, actually contain all of the amino acids your body needs to create all the proteins that you need. So that's why they're also known as the sustainers of life. You can literally live off of corn, beans, and squash and survive and get everything that your body needs. So there's reasons why it was done that way. And, once again, from, English colonists, when they arrived, they would actually remark, the women work the land, and once again, that goes back to that idea of the land as maternal source. And so the women were considered the landowners. We didn't have a concept of land ownership, but to the English, the women were the landowners. And that's why they would make deals with men typically, and that's how towns get founded and stuff like that. So there's something to be said about, the legitimacy of founding by buying land from a male sogam or sachem in different parts of the country. And women took that role very seriously because though in the communities, especially that produced agriculture in less than 2 acres, one woman could produce enough food to provide for a family of 5. They would dry out and dehydrate things. You know, there's, I mean, the river herring that we know as alewives, right? You know, the sport fishermen hate them, but literally the alewife run was such an important part of the agricultural cycle because millions of them would run up the rivers. We would trap them in our fishing weirs and we would use them as fertilizer. You know, we ate them as well, but I mean, that's mainly one of the things that they serve because of the time of the run and everything else. And so there is a whole system that was built by nature already that if people use properly can actually, you know, increase, you know, the volume and that you can get from it. And that includes agriculture. If you pay attention to the natural sciences that Native peoples have been using for thousands of years. So when I tell people about, you know, the Native influence on agriculture, well, it's really, you know, Native peoples across the continent here. You know, we have the owner's manual to this particular landscape. And even when the English arrived, they didn't know how to survive here. When the French arrived at St. Croix Island, they only spent one winter there and they left because it was too harsh for them. They had to learn native land practices and agricultural practices in order to survive here, and then they would adopt them eventually. So, you know, there's something to be said for that historical knowledge and how it sustained itself for thousands of years prior to the last 200 years. You know, we all need food to survive, and agriculture, you know, provides that. But, you know, we deal with things in the state in modern commercial agriculture of erosion and deplenishment of the soil and things of that sort. And, you know, Native people actually had a system that worked prior to that without having to use chemical fertilizers and all of that. So there's something to be learned from that thousands of years of history.
Should I just go ahead, Madam Chair, or should I go back to you?
That's great. Please do.
And how do you feel like that historical tradition of agriculture has impacted the people's access to modern commercial agriculture?
It's something we've had to work through. You know, the history of the state of Maine and its tribes, you know, we did not have treaties with the federal government. So therefore, we were not considered federally recognized tribes, you know, all the way from the time the United States government started until 1970s when the Passamaquoddy versus Morton case came out. And we were considered by the state of Maine as wards of the state, basically resigned to living only on the reservations. And our reservations, even though we had treaties that demarcated the boundaries with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, were being taken away. You know, so access to our natural lifestyle, you know, which required seasonal migration. You know, Passamaquoddy communities are an example of that, you know, remnants of that being left over. Zibayig is once again at the mouth of the St. Croix River. Madockingook is inland 25 miles in hunting territory. So we would migrate through the winter into winter hunting territory spread out so that we did not overuse the resource. And then, you know, come down to the mouth of the river in large groups during the summer months. And not being able to do that, you know, has changed the way we live. And that's why one of the reasons why you see, you know, the change to the market economy, the sale of fancy baskets and things of that sort that, you know, that are such highly prized art objects these days. Those are some of the conversions. But one of the things that we're working towards is self-determination, and true self-determination requires us to once again take over our natural foodways. And so through the land claim settlement, even though it was not perfect and has not, you know, has benefited mostly the state over the last 40 years, we did get access to a lot more land, purchase of land, especially in Western Maine. And we use that for hunting territory. We are now converting that to maple, you know, in the market economy, maple syrup business and things like that. So the more access we can have to the land, the more we can use our traditional knowledge to create things that work in this modern day market economy that do not take away from you know, the sustainability of those things to keep going in the future. You know, so we're actively working on that, but it's a process that, you know, once again, you know, the state of Maine considered us as basically children and treated us as such up until the 70s, until the federal government forced the relationship to change. And so it's been a battle ever since then, but we're making headway. I will say, today. There's a lot of, and there's indigenous scientists that are now entering the academic field, Wabanaki scientists that are now affecting Suzanne Greenlaw and others, that are bringing indigenous research methodologies into modern day sciences, food sciences especially, and we're using that to actively rebuild our natural food sources, because the American diet just does not work for Native people. There's high rates of diabetes and other things across Indian country, across the entire country, because of our lack of access to our natural food sources, and that's one of the things that we're trying to rebuild.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I had a question for Dr. McMahon. I know that thank you so much for your presentation today. I know so much of your work has been done into the dispossessed and disappeared communities of Indigenous and formerly enslaved people in the state of Maine. Would you be able to speak to that briefly for us?
Yeah, I also have done a significant amount of research on some various African American communities in the state of Maine, in particular the community of Peterborough and Warren, which I know Representative Plucker, you represent that town, which was an African American community founded in the 1780s by a former Revolutionary War veteran named Amos Peters, who was of mixed Wampanoag and African ancestry, and an enslaved woman who was brought to Warren by a ship captain named Sarah, who was originally from Guinea. And they went on to found a significantly sized African-American community that lasted until the 1950s or so in the town of Warren. Of course, there are still many people who are descended of the Peters family who live in Warren and then across the mid-coast region, really across the world. There are people in Europe and all over the country here who trace their ancestry back to the Peters family in Warren. That community was primarily engaged in agriculture as well. They were farmers. They lived off of 150 acres of land that was somehow exchanged. It's a mystery what the exchange exactly was, between Amos Peters and General Henry Knox, who was, of course, Knox County is named after, and who lived in Thomaston. And I've also done significant research into Malaga Island and other communities across the state of Maine. So, there are ongoing research projects done by a number of other researchers who are also looking into small African-American communities across rural Maine right now that could really shine a light on this 19th century history.
Thank you so much. Could you give just a general overview? How many communities do you think existed in Maine? How much land do you think they occupied? What do you think was the max population? Is there any knowledge?
Well, in the 1850s, Maine was actually more racially diverse than it is today. That's one thing to know. So today we have ranging, depending upon the census year, around 2% of Maine's population is of African descent. In the 1850s, that was around 5%. It's really hard to assess how many communities there were. I would say most small towns across the state of Maine had African-American presence in the town throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Sometimes that was only one family, one individual. Other times it was groups of families. For example, I was just speaking to a researcher from Bowdoin yesterday about a community, a homestead in the town of Bowdoin, that is very similar to Peterborough. So it really deserves significant research. The best resource to learn about Maine's African-American communities is Maine's Visible Black History by Harriet Price and Gerald Talbot, which I think is currently out of print, but it's the best encyclopedic resource to understand. I wouldn't be able to estimate the amount of land that they owned. Many of these communities, of course, were in slightly more urban areas. So Portland, Auburn, Bangor, Machias, etc. There were significant African-American communities, often surrounding areas related to maritime industries because of the availability of jobs for Black men in particular to work as seamen aboard merchant vessels, which was dangerous work, but it was one of the more well-paying jobs that an African-American man could get engaged in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Thank you so much. And my last question is for Mr. Yaffe. You mentioned that there is no federal guaranteed right for organizing for farm workers, and I had a misconception around that. So how did the UFW organize? Was that just California labor law that allowed them to do that? And is there existing sort of labor law like that for the Immokalee workers in Florida?
I am unfortunately not, I don't have a great answer for you. I do know that there is, I guess there's two answers. One is that the law is more established as a right of protection against retaliation. And so workers can organize. You don't need a law to be able to organize. Workers need a law to protect them from being fired for organizing. And the biggest issue is that right now in Maine, because workers are exempted under the federal law, it turns into a patchwork of state laws. So it could be that I could imagine that California has a law that does protect workers from retaliation. And I could also imagine that that protection comes from the UFW itself and through the hard fought struggles. Currently in Maine, as the way that I understand it is that, again, workers could organize right now. There's no law that's required, but workers could be fired for talking about organizing. It's not a protected class. Even just a couple of workers gathering together to talk about working conditions. If you're an agricultural worker, you could be fired for that. If you work in a non-agricultural setting, you could not be fired for that. So hope that helps. I wish I had more of a legal framework to share with you.
That's all right. I appreciate it. I don't know. Do you know if any of those rights are protected in Florida?
I do not, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
All right, thanks for your questions. I see a question from Senator Maxman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all of you for being here today. I also had a question for everyone to answer. That's two parts. One, is there any legislation that you're following this session that you want this group of legislators to have their eye on? And two, is there anything that you wish to see from this committee that you're not seeing right now?
Well, one of the things that, LD 2094 that was in the last legislative session, was essentially a compromise, that was worked out over several years between the tribes and the state to try to undo some of the negative effects of the 1980 land claim settlement. The story that was told to my father and others that negotiated, and even to the federal government, was that the relationship and even the creation of the power of municipalities being given to the tribes was done so as a grant of power on top of our sovereign status as a federally recognized tribe. And in the last 40 years, that's been adjudicated in the Maine courts to basically say that the municipality language was a limit on power and that we are limited down to that. So, when it comes to what I would like to see is kind of like a respectful relationship that takes into account that Indigenous knowledge, and to pay attention to the efforts that are happening, with, the tribes in the state of Maine to try to restore that natural, world of sustenance that was here before, and where this committee could probably support. The law, I mentioned that first they came for the fish and then they came for the wood, and they were also coming for the people. I mean, Kate really and everybody's really made a clear case for that as well. But the logging industry did so much damage to our environment. And imagine that 95% of Maine has been deforested at some point, and some of it continues to still be that way. All of our woods are skinny trees, and to support that industry, lots of dams were built. And we are no longer logging in that fashion anymore. We're no longer sending logs down the rivers, yet those dams still exist, and they cause the alewives to not run up the rivers, to the places where they naturally spawn. It blocks all of that natural processes from happening. And that's one of the things I would look at for this committee right here, is to examine some of the effects, especially of the commercial industries that are kind of under your paradigm here, the history of it, to look at what has been left behind and think about what we can do to make our lands healthier by undoing some of those processes that have, I mean, those logging dams serve no purpose at this point. There's just been no money to take them out. And so that's one of the things I would hope that the state of Maine would start to pay attention to, is the efforts by the tribes, you know, to restore our rivers back to their natural healthy balance, and you know, get that going, because it benefits all sectors of you know, the industries that you are working on here.
Yeah, you know, I echo a lot of what Chris said. For legislation specifically coming up into this session, the work that Representative Talbot Ross is doing is really important, and she has a number of bills that she's bringing forward right now that support African American history curriculum, anti-racist work, renaming of places in the state of Maine that have pejorative place names. I'm sure some of you noticed this summer that there was an article in the newspaper that Representative Talbot Ross had supported the renaming of an island that began with the N-word. So there are still place names in the state of Maine, privately owned land, that have pejorative place names in them. And of course, there are not just place names that are pejorative against African Americans. There are a number of places in Maine that also have inflammatory, of course, Indigenous monikers associated with them. So I would hope that this committee can look at supporting in particular that particular legislation, as well as you know, thinking more critically about how Maine's agriculture, forestry, and these other industries have been involved in slavery and colonialism, and the role that they could play in helping to right the wrongs of the past.
Thank you. I would add quickly, the report from the Permanent Commission last year had a series of priorities that I know some of those bills, especially like 2094, are going to be back this year. And there are certainly a high importance of moving forward with honoring tribal sovereignty and protecting workers' rights, that this committee can be in support of, and that those things are really a matter of historical perspective and justice. And it's not, it's less of a question of how and more of a question of when. On the farm worker side, I know Representative Harnett has a couple of bills that specifically get at some of the state exemptions for farm workers. And there are some other sort of low-hanging fruit, such as providing driver's licenses for people who don't have federal immigration status that would allow them to get driver's license that costs like no money and just are good for public safety. So I guess that would be a starting point. And then the last one that I would say is providing some sort of pathway for funding for the Permanent Commission on the status of racial, Indigenous, and tribal populations, in order for that commission to carry out the work that many of you are already tasking us with. So thank you.
Thank you for those responses. I have a question for Mr. Yaffe. If you could please, give us a little bit more information on workers' experiences during COVID. We haven't really had the chance to have an update like this, so it's really important.
Sure. I would say in general that food processing and production occupations lead in some of the national outbreaks and certainly some of the larger outbreaks here in Maine over the course of the past year. Migrant worker housing sites are often like everything that you would recommend doing to protect people from COVID. It's like the opposite of that. And there really isn't any meaningful enforcement of guidelines happening. Maine does have a series of guidelines that came out through a collaborative with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Labor, and the Maine Mobile Health Program that offer a path of what employers should do, and those guidelines have no teeth to them. There's no enforcement mechanism. OSHA basically hasn't existed during the pandemic. And so there is some meaningful action that could be taken to not only look at this pandemic, but to think about how this pandemic is more of a symptom of larger challenges and problems, and how unless you address those underlying causes, the disparities that are seen will not go away. They'll just replicate themselves in different contexts. The last thing that I would add is probably looking at the plan and scope of Maine's vaccination effort, and sort of who is at the front of the line for that currently and who is at the back of the line, and what the decisions are in terms of equity in that process for the communities that are most directly impacted. Lastly, there's a pretty big missing chunk now that the CARES Act paid sick requirement ended. So there is an outbreak that I heard about yesterday in an agricultural or food processing facility. Basically everybody that works there is considered a close contact because everybody works so closely together. And there's no simple answer to like, what should those workers do in the 10 days that they now need to quarantine? Before it was pretty clear that they would just get paid for the 10 days under the CARES Act. And now that that's gone. I know Maine's new paid leave act starts, but that doesn't, somebody that just started accruing leave doesn't have enough leave to take 10 days off. So there are some basic worker protection issues that I think are on the table. And I would, there are also workers that are falling out from, there are workers who, because of how they're paid in agriculture, they're not eligible for unemployment because they're treated as independent contractors in some cases. There's a whole issue with labor contracting in general that you could spend hours talking about. And there are workers who aren't eligible for the federal economic impact payments. And so they're people that are here in Maine and are being left behind out of the limited safety net that exists at the moment. Again, Vermont has some examples of a model where the state did allocate some funds for people that were left behind. But that's not something that has risen up here in Maine. So I think with that, unfortunately, I have to step out, but I really appreciate the invitation to join with you today. And I'll make sure to share my contact information with Representative O'Neill so that if there's any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I hope that the rest of your meeting goes well today. And thanks again.
Thank you so much for your time today, Mr. Yaffe. So we're going to try to wrap up in a few minutes just to accommodate everyone's schedule. You've been really generous with your time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to have the chance to ask Mr. Newell. I know that you speak, when we first booked this conversation, you had mentioned that you went and spoke with the National Park Service. And we've heard about ag and forestry, but I wonder if you could say something relative to conservation.
Absolutely. I've been loving my work with the National Park Service. David Goldstein is the one that works with tribes in Region 1, which, is the state of Maine as well. And as the head of the Abbey Museum. I get to work with Becky Colwell at Acadia National Park now. And it's been a great relationship because the National Park Service really has some reckoning to do when it comes to the birth of the American conservation movement back in the 19th century. There was a lot when it and the way it affected Native peoples in this country. There's actually a very dark history that goes along with that. When it comes to conservation of land, the creation of national parks, the idea was to save pristine wilderness. Now, the word wilderness, that English language term, is very benign in modern day times, and we just think, we hear that word as the woods. But actually, in the early days of colonization, it was a term of erasure. The term savage actually, derives from the term sauvage, which means of the wild. And by classifying the native cultures that they were encountering here as of the wild, we were therefore less than human because we did not live in the English language word civilization, which is how England was split up. Wilderness was where the animals lived. The civilization was where people lived, and they came here and they saw people living amongst what they thought of as wilderness, and therefore did not live in what they thought of as civilization. So that difference in culture, was very impactful to how land usage for early Americans began. And when it came to conservation, places like Yellowstone, those were not unoccupied lands. Those were occupied by Native peoples. And the first process of conserving it was first to depopulate, those areas of the Native peoples. And the most effective way to do that was the killing of the bison, especially out west. We went from 40 million bison in a 30-year period down to less than 500,000. By killing the food supply of the Plains peoples, that was one of the ways to drive them out of home territories. And that's part of the history of the creation of national parks and conservation. And that's one of the things that the National Park Service is at this moment now starting to reckon with and come to terms with. That there is that dark history that's involved, but in the modern day times, conservation, national parks, these are all places that Native people, we are all deeply involved in wanting to, once again, keep undeveloped, right? To keep the wilderness there, to try to keep those natural systems. And we're actively in the state of Maine working with Acadia National Park to use indigenous science methodology to prove that the presence of human beings, harvesting materials within the park in a sustainable fashion will actually cause those resources to grow back in larger numbers every year. And so what we're showing with the National Park Service is that, there's actually a role human beings play in conservation and sustainability. And that's once again built into the indigenous manual for the land here that our ancestors built long ago. There's, conservation, even the museum world, museums, I'm the head of a colonial museum. Museums are colonial artifacts. Native peoples in this land did not preserve our histories that way. And so even museums have that dark history. And that's something that when we hear about decolonizing museums, it's really about undoing the harmful practices of museums, of being extractive from Native peoples or extracting human remains and holding them out of access away from Native peoples. And it's now become, in the state of Maine with the Abbey Museum, a true partnership where we are working actively as, and that's one of the reasons half of my job description is senior partner to Wabanaki Nation. So that's, the movement that we see going forward. There's tremendous benefit when that happens, not just to Wabanaki peoples, but to all parties. So I was encouraged, when it comes to these things, especially when, some of the people that would kind of back off against the changes that are being proposed in LD 2094 that give powers back to the tribes, that there's a sense of fear that gets built that, we're going to be taking away economic opportunity when in actuality, the tribes really want to restore that natural balance and once again, restore nature's ability to create larger resources by the proper interaction of human peoples with the landscape here. So there's so much to be learned, I would encourage you, to not be scared of the idea of our Wabanaki peoples having more control over clean waters and clean landscapes.
Thank you very much for your answers. We really appreciate you being here today, and this was really helpful for us. So thanks for your time.
It's very informative. We appreciate it, and thanks for your answers also. And I'm sure if there are other questions that people will be able to contact you, I'm hoping that you'll leave your information with Representative O'Neill and she can share it with the rest of the committee. Again, thank you for this morning.
Thank you.
And with that, we have to move on. We're running a little behind schedule. We do have 4 public hearings coming up this morning. So I would like to start and again, welcome everybody here and to our ACF committee. We have 4 bills that we are hearing this morning. Just remember, it's an electronic meeting, so everybody please be patient out there. We have glitches, people get lost, get shut off, internet goes bad, whatever it may be. It is live streamed on YouTube, so make sure you are muted when you are not speaking, because we can hear and also, of course, we can see what's going on. And make sure your name appears the way on your screen that it should appear, that it doesn't say Jim's iPad or something like that. We need to know who you are. And just to remind the committee, you have to be on screen when we vote, which I don't believe there's any voting today. But the chat box is strictly for more or less technical questions. Anything of substance, please, say it on mic. And turn on your mic when you're getting ready to testify. And today, when we go ahead, the procedure will be that we will go ahead and have the sponsor and any other co-sponsors or legislators speak, followed by the department, and then followed by the general public who wishes to speak on the bill. And remember, for the general public, we do request that you keep it to 3 minutes, and I do have my lovely little timers here that I will be timing 3 minutes. So if you hear the ding ding ding, that means that I will be interrupting you and saying that will be it. And so with that, I think other than introducing, first I'll introduce the analysts, and the other couple of people that haven't introduced themselves yet is Karen Netto, is our analyst, and our clerk is Cheryl McGowan, and Cheryl helps us keep everything running here this morning and keep things straight. And I think with that, who do we have? Representative Underwood, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning. I'm Representative Underwood, District 147 here in Presque Isle. And it's good to be here this morning, and it's been interesting listening to the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative McCray.
Yes, finally. Sorry about all this. Had a testimony and then had a hard time getting on. I'm Representative Dave McCray up in Fort Fairfield in Central Worcester County. And just to make everybody feel a little bit better, we're in a heat wave up here. Yesterday morning it was 20 below. Today it was only 16. So below. So anyway, that makes you all feel better. I'm glad to be here representing District 148. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As I said, we have 4 public hearings, and we'll get right into them. The first one is LD 33, an act to improve the laws governing hemp by bringing them into compliance with federal law. Senator Black.
Good morning, Senator Dale, Representative Neal, members of the Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I am Senator Russell Black. I represent Senate District 17. I am here today to present LD 33, an act to improve the laws governing hemp, bringing them into compliance with the federal law. I'm bringing this forward for the department. I am the sponsor of LD 33. I support this bill in order to bring the state of Maine's hemp program into compliance with federal USDA requirements. With hemp farming now allowed under federal law, USDA requires there be a consistency among states regarding the state hemp programs. This bill puts forward a number of adjustments to the current Maine state law that will bring us in line with the USDA requirements. Most of them are minor and can be readily explained by the Department of Agriculture staff. The agricultural production of hemp in Maine and across the country has faced headwinds recently due to oversaturation and other market dynamics. However, by bringing Maine's hemp regulations in line with federal standards, there will be a stability in the state's oversight of this important crop. Growers will understand the hemp program's parameters and can plan accordingly. Hopefully, a brighter days are ahead for the Maine hemp producers. And I'd be defer my questions, if you would, to the department. This is a department bill, and there's better qualified people behind me to answer your questions, but take them if you want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Black. I don't see any hands up, so I'll go over to co-sponsors or other legislators, either Senator Maximin or Representative Landry. Do you wish to comment on the bill or testify on the bill? Shaking their heads no. Okay, I'll go over to the department. Mr. Fish, are you still on here? Are you speaking for the department? I seem to have lost Gary Fish. He's been on the entire time. Cheryl, do we have Gary Fish in the attendees?
He's coming. He's coming.
He's coming. All right.
He should be there right now.
Okay. Yeah, I got knocked off, and now I'm back.
Okay.
Can you
Welcome.
hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you. Welcome.
All right, great. All right. Well, good morning, Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill and the honorable members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Gary Fish, and I'm the Maine State Horticulturist speaking on behalf of the department in support of LD 33, an act to improve the laws governing hemp by bringing them into compliance with federal law. And we definitely thank Senator Black for sponsoring this bill. And so the department, we've been licensing hemp growers since 2016 under the 2014 Federal Farm Bill authorization. But in December of 2018, the Federal Agriculture Improvement Act, which used to be called the Farm Bill, included a provision making hemp production legal in all 50 states. The act directed the USDA to develop rules to provide consistency in hemp regulation throughout the country. Shortly thereafter, USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service published an interim final rule, 7 CFR Part 990, and subsequently USDA AMS published the final rule on January 15, 2021, which becomes effective on March 22nd, 2021. As part of the final rule, USDA requires approved plans from states that want to license hemp grow. So USDA AMS approved a state plan for us back based on the interim final rule on September 2nd, 2020. And fortunately, this new final rule does not make a lot of changes that require any amendments to this bill, because we had written this prior to the final rule. However, to implement the approved state plan and a new state plan, the legislature must enact Maine statutory changes to conform with the federal rules. Once the statutory changes are in place, the department will amend the current licensing rules in Code of Maine Regulations 01001, Chapter 274, to fully implement the approved state plan for the 2022 growing season. So the following changes are proposed to come into federal compliance. First one is the federal rules require a 10-year prohibition on licensing if an applicant has been convicted of a felony related to a controlled substance. And currently, the state law only allows up to 3 years. So we need to add applicants for licenses to grow, process, or transport hemp to Title V, Section 5303(2) to allow the federally mandated 10-year prohibition on licensing. In Title VII, Section 2231, we need to look at a number of things. Subsection 1A, we need to add the definition of key participants. The USDA rules are pretty much predicated on requiring us to identify all those key participants in hemp production operation, since those eligibility restrictions apply to all key participants. Subsection 2, we need to delete the exemption for planting 3 hemp plants for personal use. The USDA rule does not allow for that exemption from licensing. Subsection 2B, we need to remove the prohibition on asking applicants to provide seed or clone information with their license application. These documents, which we call certificates of analysis, or in some situations seed certification, are much more easily obtained now than they were in the past. And it's really important that we get those before people license, to give them some recommendations on whether or not the variety they want to plant is going to turn out to be legal hemp. We need to look at subsection 6, which enacts rulemaking language to specifically address the need to conform with the federal rules and to establish a process for criminal background checks of licenses and all key participants, which is part of the USDA requirement. Subsection 6A, we need to repeal that because it was really only established for a preliminary indoor licensing program, and that program has been in place for 2 seasons now. And finally, subsection 9 of Title VII needs to be repealed because the federal rules require states to report the locations of all hemp growing sites, so we can't continue to have that to be confidential. So in summary, all these changes are necessary to bring the state law into compliance with the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 and the USDA Final Rule 7 CFR Part 990. And I thank you for listening, and I'm available for questions now as well as at the work session.
Are there any questions for Mr. Fish? Representative Fluker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, it seems to me that this bill has a number of provisions which are not in line with kind of the way we do things in Maine. The most obvious is that we can grow marijuana plants for personal use in our backyard, but we're not allowed to grow hemp plants. Could you give us some details on why the federal government is asking that?
Well, because federally marijuana is still not legal, and so the hemp rules that they've put together are very restrictive in terms of the potential that somebody might be growing something that is not hemp. So they are not allowing any exemptions from licensing if you are growing a cannabis plant that is supposed to be hemp, and therefore we would have to remove that allowance in the state law.
And to follow up, how would you see the department enforcing that?
Well, I don't see that it would be very easy for us to do that. Obviously, we would have to work together with the law enforcement community to be on the lookout for people that are growing. They already have been reporting to us people growing cannabis that they don't know whether it's hemp or whether it's marijuana. So we often get calls like that. But as you probably would assume, it will be very difficult for us to know whether or not somebody is growing those plants. And the marijuana laws do allow them to grow 3 cannabis plants. Whether or not those are hemp or marijuana, I don't think anybody would know until the cannabis was tested, if it ever did get tested.
I just wanted to clarify on, you said law enforcement is calling you because they're worried about hemp growing, or they're worried about cannabis growing? I mean,
well, both. They often will call to say that they found a number of cannabis plants and they are looking to find out if they are a licensed hemp grower, or if not, then I'm assuming they go to the Office of Marijuana Policy to find out from them.
Okay. So there's no plans to start checking backyard cannabis production to see if it is illegal hemp production or illegal marijuana production?
Not from this department, that's for sure. We don't have the ability to do that or the resources to do that.
And we're not seeing other law enforcement trying to do that?
I don't really know that for sure.
If someone was growing hemp, then we would not charge them. There's no criminal code for this, that we wouldn't charge them with any crime.
There is, I'd have to go back and look at the statute. I don't remember what the penalties are specifically for violating that part of the law. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I did have it open, but then when I got knocked off, I had to close everything.
Thank you.
Representative McCray, you have a question.
Yes, so once this bill has been passed, and I'm sure it will be, technically, we're going to have a situation where it will be legal, we'll say for me, to grow 3 marijuana plants, but not 3 hemp plants. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. And again, it's based on the federal law, and until they catch up and allow for legal marijuana, then if we're going to have a federally approved program, we're going to have to comply with their requirements.
Were you able to find that information?
It's coming up right now.
Are there any other questions while we're waiting for Mr. Fish?
Yes.
Representative Fluker.
Yeah. What are the repercussions for not being compliant with the federal government on this?
So on the federal government side, they do have significant penalties if they were to come in and actually run the hemp licensing program, and I don't have that at the tip of my tongue either.
The other portion of this that gives me pause is the 10. You can't have a criminal. You can't have I don't know if it's just a felony or a misdemeanor charge against you for the last 10 years in order to grow a plant that has no criminal use, as far as I'm concerned. And it seems contradictory to our state's intentions to rehabilitate folks who have done time and gotten out of and are no longer incarcerated.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. It's the federal requirement, and again, it's based on the compromises that were made to develop this statute and rules at the federal level, where you've got states that still consider marijuana to be a scheduled drug and other states that don't. And because they are working on the side of those folks that don't have legal marijuana, they have put in this requirement. It's only for felonies that were related to drug charges, basically. So it is limited to that, but it does not, there is no allowance otherwise. So that's why we would have to change our statutes to then be in conformance.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fish, for your testimony. It's been a little bit since I last looked at this, and you had helped me go through it a little while ago, a year or two now. But I wondered if you could explain a little bit what's in statute versus rule, and because I think my real question is, do we expect any changes to come from the new administration? So that might affect timeline with adopting this, and maybe it will be less restrictive, that kind of thing. I'm just curious if you could.
So what we heard last from USDA Ag Marketing Service is that even though the Biden administration has put a hold on any rules that were passed by the previous administration, that they have been told that there will be hands-off on this particular rule, and that there probably will not be anything more than possibly another chance for public input. But at this point, they don't see a hold on the federal rule, that it will go into place on March 22nd as it's supposed to, and without any changes other than possibly in the future if they do have a second round of public comment.
Thank you. Wonder if
And
there's
so
a chance to.
What that statute puts into place is the requirements for all of the state programs and the plans that we have to submit for approval. And we will have to resubmit a plan, although we already did submit one before and it was approved. We'll have to resubmit another one with some minor changes to it. The plan that we initially submitted was general enough, and they approved it so that it wouldn't require us to make a lot of amendments to it, but we will have to do so.
Thank you.
And I'm going to have to, as far as the state law goes, Representative Pluker, in terms of penalties, there are no, I think it's a Class E crime, if I remember correctly, but I want to get that for you, and I'll provide that as soon as I have it, and we can talk about it at the work session if you want as well.
Representative Pluker.
And if we could just also have the information on what are the impacts on not passing this bill for the work session, that would be great. Thank you.
There are other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Fish.
All right, thank you.
Cheryl, I don't have anyone else on my list testifying on this bill, but I do see Heather Spalding on here. Heather, were you planning on testifying on this bill?
Yes, she is.
Okay, come right in, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Senator Dill. And before I get started, I was a little late and I ended up uploading a prior version of my testimony. And so maybe I'll just note that Cheryl, I'll be submitting a slightly revised version. And I do really appreciate the comments that Representative Pluker was raising. My comments do not address that. So officially to start, good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Heather Spalding, and I'm Deputy Director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, MOFGA. MOFGA supports LD 33, and I want to thank Senator Black and Representative Maxman for their efforts to move this effort along as well. We are committed to building a local and organic future for cannabis and hemp production in Maine. We do operate an independent third-party verification and certification program called Certified Clean Cannabis by MOFGA, MC3, and that program caters to medical caregivers and adult use producers in Maine who are striving to provide the safest and best quality products in the market. Our standards mirror the crop production components of the USDA National Organic Program. MC3 program is a voluntary marketing label designed to ensure customer and patient confidence in growing practices. And to comply, all aspects of operations pertaining to MC3 standards must be verifiable through an audit process. This audit process consists of an MC3 system plan, review of plan, record-keeping analysis, on-site inspection, and ultimately a certification decision. The process occurs on an annual basis, and the certification operation is required to renew each year to maintain a valid certificate. We have 17 certified producers in that program. And as you heard from Gary Fish, the 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp as an agricultural crop in the US, so MOFGA Certification Services now certifies hemp under the USDA National Organic Program. MCS certifies 10 farms for hemp crop and 1 processor of hemp distillate and oils, and we require thorough record keeping of our certified hemp producers. Applicants must submit a standard crops application and a hemp supplement and hemp compliance affidavit. These requirements are essential for assuring confidence in the marketplace, and we feel that the requirements outlined in LD 33 would do the same for the broader industry. Farm viability is a big part of the policy work that we do at MOFGA, and while we advocate for agricultural systems that minimize regulations between farmers and customers, we also want to ensure that the products are safe for consumers and that consumers have confidence in the market. And this is where the smart policies come in, and we feel that product safety testing is absolutely essential to ensuring the integrity of hemp that will be consumed by the public. We hope that the state will adopt an approach for comprehensive testing at harvest that would assess levels of THC, pesticides, heavy metals, mold, and microbes. We know from recent news about lead and arsenic in processed baby food that the world is contaminated, and we have to work extra hard to ensure the safety of our food and medicine. MOFGA supports LD 33 and its call for testing fees and background checks. And we look forward to the state bringing the laws governing hemp into compliance with federal law. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Heather. Is there anyone else, Cheryl, to testify on this bill?
There is not.
Okay. Then I will close the hearing on LD 33, and we'll open up the hearing on LD 65, an act to invest in the stewardship and management of properties acquired with the proceeds from the Land for Maine's Future Fund or the Public Access to Maine Waters Fund. And with that, we're out of time because of the title. But go ahead, the length of the title. Go ahead, Representative O'Neill.
All right, sorry about that. Let me open this up. My computer restarted, so I lost everything. All right, Senator Dill, colleagues of the Ag, Conservation and Forestry Committee. I am Maggie O'Neill. I represent House District 15, which is in Saco. I'm pleased to come before you today to present LD 65, which is an act to invest in the stewardship and management of properties acquired with the proceeds from the Land for Maine's Future Fund or the Public Access to Maine Waters Fund. The department is here to give you a little bit more information, but I'll let you know that LD 65 will enable LMF's board to make small contributions up to 5% of the appraised value from the LMF bond funds to an applicant's dedicated stewardship endowment for the long-term monitoring, stewardship, and management of properties acquired with LMF funding. It comes out of the Maine Land Conservation Task Force #1 recommendation, which is to take proper care of our treasured public and private conservation lands and ensure that they meet the needs of Maine people into the future. The Stewardship Contribution Fund will be available to state, municipal, and land trust applicants upon successful completion of LMF program requirements. It will be required to be placed in an account dedicated for stewardship and management activities, ensuring that the investment is secure and used for the intended purpose. And I'll just note that with 2020 seeing a record-breaking number of visits to Maine state parks and land trusts and municipalities providing similar anecdotal evidence, that there's a collective sense of urgency on the need to secure funding for the care and upkeep of these places that are really special to us. So this bill is a small step in that direction. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I would ask that you ask Ms. Demers the more substantive ones. Thanks.
Are there any questions for Representative O'Neill? Are there any other sponsors or other legislators who wish to testify on this bill? Okay. Before we move forward, I do have a question for the committee. Is it just me that's lost the chat function, or has everybody lost that chat function? Is this something that Cheryl has turned off?
Yes, I turned it off because my SLG wanted it off. And now because we're in the meeting, I can't turn it back on. I've turned it back on, but it won't come back on because the meeting's already in progress.
Okay, just
So
curious.
we'll have to use emails for this one.
I was just making sure it wasn't something I had done on my end, so.
You did not do it. I did it.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies.
Moving on. Sarah Demers from the department.
Good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and distinguished members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I am Sarah Demers, Director of the Land for Maine's Future Program, and I'm here testifying on behalf of the department in support of LD 65. And I want to thank Representative O'Neill for sponsoring this bill. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of the Land for Maine's Future Program. I think you all have heard a little bit about it, but I'm gonna proceed with my written testimony. If I go off track, I'll who knows where we'll end up. Just over 30 years ago, the Maine legislature declared that the future social and economic well-being of the citizens of the state depends on maintaining the quality and availability of natural areas for recreation, hunting, and fishing, conservation, wildlife habitat, vital ecological functions, and scenic beauty, and that the state, as the public's trustee, has a responsibility and a duty to pursue an aggressive and coordinated policy to assure that this Maine heritage is passed on to future generations. You can find this language in Maine Revised Statutes, Title 5, 6200. For me, it's probably some of the most eloquent statutory language I've read, and I love being able to share it with members of the committee and the public in general. Since the establishment of the Land for Maine's Future program, we have delivered that and much more to the people of Maine. LMF has played a key role in protecting many of our state parks, including Aroostook, Androscoggin Riverlands, Bradbury Mountain, Mount Kineo, Camden Hills, and Ferry Beach, as well as historical sites such as Katahdin Iron Works and Colonial Pemaquid. We've also helped to protect Maine wildlife management areas owned and managed by the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, including Mount Agamenticus, Kennebunk Plains, Morgan Meadows, and Mattawamkeag wildlife management areas. We've helped to secure access to the Kennebec, Penobscot, Machias, St. John, St. Croix, and Androscoggin rivers, and secured the opportunity to recreationally fish across the coast from Cobscook to Casco Bay and from Grand Lake Stream to the Megalloway River. While remaining true to its original purpose, the Land for Maine's Future program has also evolved to address emerging needs, including providing support for the working landscapes that contribute to Maine's rural economy. Examples of this support include farmland preservation projects that keep land available for the production of food and fiber, working forest conservation easements that help to ensure the stability of Maine's wood supply for the forest products industries, while also guaranteeing recreation opportunities for hunting, hiking, fishing, and other pursuits. Working waterfront access projects that provide essential support to our commercial fishing industry by securing access to the water, as well as bait, fuel buying stations, and processing facilities all along Maine's coast. The department believes it is time for LMF to evolve again in response to the growing recognition that it is not enough to invest in these amazing places for public use and enjoyment. We also have a responsibility to be a partner in the long-term stewardship of these places. In 2020, Maine State Parks set an all-time record for visitation, topping the 3 million mark for the first time. Public lands from Tumbledown Mountain to the Cutler Coast also saw significant surges in use, as did rail trails and boat launches across the state. This heavy use takes a toll on trails and fragile natural areas, and stewardship funding is vital to managing these resources for people and for habitat. As Representative O'Neill mentioned, the Maine Conservation Task Force 2019 report, Shaping the Next Generation of Land Conservation in Maine, recommends that we take proper care of our treasured public and private conservation lands and ensure that they meet the needs of Maine people into the future, and offers a variety of strategies that can be employed to implement that recommendation. We believe a small investment from the Land for Maine's Future program toward the stewardship of lands acquired with LMF funding is a good faith effort the state can take toward ensuring that these properties are cared for over time and remain the shining examples that the public expects and deserves from their investment. As conceived, the bill will authorize the LMF board to award a small supplemental grant of LMF bond funds to successful applicants for the long-term stewardship and management of the property. The LMF contribution would be capped in statute to no more than 5% of the appraised value of the acquired property. This amount is consistent with other supplemental awards allowed in statute and represents a meaningful contribution to the applicant. This supplemental award would be required to be held in the applicant's dedicated stewardship account for the specific purpose of stewardship, defense, and management of the LMF funded property, ensuring the long-term public use and enjoyment of conservation and recreation of the property. Current statutory language does not allow the Land for Maine's Future bond funds to be used for long-term stewardship of properties. This bill would change that and grant the board the authority to make the award. Stewardship investments would be available for projects receiving funds from the Land for Maine's Future Fund, the Public Access to Maine Waters Fund, and the newly conceived Farmland Access and Protection Fund if established by the legislature. The Land for Maine's Future program consistently delivers the people of Maine a high-quality resource for an exceptional value. We recognize that in addition to providing access to the natural world, we have a responsibility to partner in the investment of the long-term stewardship of these properties for public benefit. And it is for these reasons that the department urges you to support LD 65. Thank you for your time and consideration. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to do what I can.
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Next up to testify on LD 65 is Philip Mayhew.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Philip Matthew, and I'm here today as a representative of Sierra Club Maine's more than 20,000 members and supporters statewide. We are here to strongly urge your support of LD 65, and I am pleased to represent all of our members in that. In addition to being a representative of Sierra Club Maine, I come to you today as a conservation professional who has had the privilege of stewarding lands acquired with assistance from the Land for Maine's Future Fund. While the lands that I work with account for just a small fraction of the over 600,000 acres protected by LMF, they grant me a window into both the value of the existing program and the merit of the changes presented in this bill. LD 65 represents a common sense reform that will enhance the ability of the LMF program to maximize the long-term value of conserved properties. The current LMF program currently places the full burden of stewardship and management of funded projects on either the state government or a partnering entity, and these costs can be significant, particularly for smaller land trusts or municipalities that have limited operational funding. By permitting a small portion of funding to be dedicated towards these tasks, LD 65 will improve the viability of LMF projects with significant stewardship or management needs. Doing so would in effect expand the range of viable partner organizations, help to leverage funding from other less flexible sources, and ensure that the requirements of the project agreements are met. This change shifts the focus from protecting properties in the moment to ensuring that those properties remain valuable ecological and cultural resources for the people of Maine long into the future. Land for Maine's Future is a vital funding source for conservation in Maine, and this bill will only enhance the program by reducing the barrier of stewardship and management costs to project viability. On behalf of Sierra Club Maine, I urge you to vote ought to pass on LD 65. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, again, thank you. Cheryl, that's all I have on my list. Do you have anyone else?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, I will close the hearing on LD 65, and I will open up the hearing on LD 66, an act to improve livestock and poultry preparation. And to do the presentation is Representative Dunphy. Do we see Representative Dunphy? Yes, I see her name pop up at least. Welcome, Representative Dunphy. It's good to see you. You live 2 streets away from me and I never see you, but you're on mute too.
Thank you. Now we get all that squared away. We should Zoom in Old Town.
I guess.
It's good to see everybody. And good morning. And I realize I owe you some treats. I have a plan for when we're back in session. Haven't forgotten, and I'll bring them in. And good morning to everybody, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, all of my friends on the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And I am here to present LD 66, an act to improve livestock and poultry preparation. And as you know, my name is Michelle Dunphy. I represent House District 122, which is Old Town in the Indian Island voting district. And this is a critical part of Maine's food economy, are the producers and processors of livestock who provide high quality meat and poultry products to consumers within the state. Meat and poultry processors are subject to high food safety and quality standards that are overseen by Maine Meat and Poultry Inspection Program, MMPI. And MMPI inspection assists Maine's very small to medium-sized livestock and poultry producers by providing an avenue for their products to enter intrastate and interstate commerce, and ensures that their products are healthy, safe, appropriately labeled, and produced humanely. In order for MMPI to in order for the program to work optimally and efficiently, the underlying statutes governing livestock preparation also require review and improvement from time to time. LD 66 is an effort to introduce changes that will ensure MMPI stays in compliance with applicable federal law and remove outdated references, update certain definitions, and clarify registration requirements for custom meat operations. We all want our family, friends, and our neighbors to have access to high quality meat products, and I am pleased to support these efforts with this bill. The Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry staff will be happy to answer any questions, as will I. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Representative Dunphy. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I do see Nancy McBrady on my screen. I assume must be speaking for the department.
Yes, I am. Good morning. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, members of the committee. I am Nancy McBrady, the Director of the Bureau of Agriculture, Food and Rural Resources. We are within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. I am here today to speak in favor of LD 66, an act to improve livestock and poultry preparation. And we really thank Representative Dunphy for sponsoring this bill. It's very nice to see you today. The Bureau's Quality Assurance and Regulations Division includes the Maine Meat and Poultry Inspection Program, MMPI, which Representative Dunphy just referred to. This program exists to protect the health and welfare of consumers by ensuring that livestock used in the production of meat and poultry products are humanely handled, disease-free, and that the resulting products distributed by Maine inspected establishments are wholesome, not adulterated, and correctly labeled and packaged. The program, operating under 2 cooperative agreements with USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, FSIS, must implement inspection activities that are same as that of the inspection of activities of FSIS. This bill makes a number of updates to Title 22, Chapter 562A, Preparation of Livestock and Poultry Products for Human Consumption. These updates are necessary so that Maine can remain in compliance with FSIS requirements for state and cooperative interstate shipment inspection programs that are so vital to our work. A number of these updates to Chapter 562-A are necessary to correct typographical, word omissions, and other minor issues. We view this as a sort of cleanup. Over the years, the chapter has been updated by the legislature, but unfortunately, some of the textual changes that have occurred in certain sections were not appropriately mirrored in other areas of the statute. Fixing these minor errors will help update the chapter overall and will not have an effect on our department's policies and regulations. I'd like to direct you, though, to Section 2514A, which does make a change, and we'll be happy to answer questions after this to really talk you through it. But as currently written, this section allows custom operators who are only allowed to produce products that are labeled not for sale to actually sell their products in commerce. So this section is contrary to actual law because federal law prohibits this activity. The new language would eliminate this confusing reference and make Title 22 compliant with federal law. This change will not impact a slaughterhouse, a red meat processor, or poultry processor's ability to continue doing what they do, which is offer the surface of a slaughterhouse and cut, wrap, smoke, process, and other opportunities and products, to the individuals that don't intend to sell the product and will be taking that product home for the consumption of their own family, friends, and non-paying guests. Now, because the bill clarifies that custom operators must be registered under state law and the standards, let me start over there. The bill also clarifies that custom operators must be registered under state law and sanitation standards will apply to their operation. The current statute says two things. One, that custom operators may register under section 2514A, or two, they must be licensed in section 25141D in order to sell in commerce. Because custom operators can only prepare products for personal consumption and not sell in commerce, it's necessary to eliminate that licensing reference. But it's prudent to now require custom establishments to register with the department. This is because the cooperative agreements between the department and FSIS states that all custom exempt establishments will be reviewed by the state. Changing the language in section 2514A from may to must will ensure that all custom operators are counted and can then be assessed for basic sanitation and humane handling practices. It's also my understanding that many of them already are registered, and this will not be a major change in their operating practices. The bill also adds a registered establishment, such as a custom establishment, to section 2521B in the chapter. This governs the inspection of the use of humane slaughtering methods. It is likely an oversight that this has not been added in prior statutory updates. Correcting this error will allow the state to suspend the registration of custom operators who are slaughtering animals inhumanely. All animals, whether at custom or inspected establishments, have to be slaughtered in accordance with the Federal Humane Methods of Slaughter Act of 1978. Amending the statute will now appropriately reflect this requirement. Finally, the bill proposes to eliminate language concerning the inspection of equines for slaughter, as horse slaughter is currently banned in the United States effectively. We also clarify statutory definitions of meat, the term amenable, and exotic species. Thanks for your consideration of this bill today. I'm happy to answer questions at this time and at the work session. And also at the work session will be Dr. Jennifer Eberly, who oversees the MMPI program and will be able to handle many of the technical questions that you no doubt have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Fluker.
If this is a question best kept to the work session, you can let me know, Director Brady. But how would these changes affect the custom processors who are processing less than 1,000 birds or less than 1,000 rabbits?
Good question. And yes, Dr. Eberly can definitely get into the details with you about that. But ultimately, custom exempt poultry processors and rabbit processors do have the ability to sell in commerce. And there are other areas in the statute, in particular 2517-2, that speaks to that, are remaining unchanged and are not affected by this.
But they would need to be registered now where it was a may before?
I believe so.
Okay. And I had one follow-up question.
Sure.
Could you just give me an example of amenable exotic bird animals?
I cannot. I will defer.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheryl, do we have anyone else? I don't have anybody else on my list for this particular bill.
We do not.
Okay, thank you. I will close the hearing on LD 66. And then we'll open the hearing up on LD 90, an act to amend the removal process application to the position of State Supervisor of the Forest Protection Unit of the Bureau of Forestry. And that is Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and distinguished co-workers on the ACF committee. I'm Representative Tom Schofield, and I'm sponsoring LD 90 on behalf of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, ACF. Within the Bureau of Forestry, the Chief Forest Ranger of the Maine Forest Service holds an appointed position. The same statute that directs the appointment process for bureau directors, deputy commissioners, and other major policy influencing positions also applies to the Chief Forest Ranger. The person who accepts this position is appointed or removed by the appointing authority and serves as the authority at the authority's will and pleasure. The bill would not change that process. So here's the problem. There could very easily be a situation, for a variety of reasons, where the chief forest ranger is either not reappointed after an election or change of administration, or removed by the appointing authority under the current law. After 12 months from accepting his appointment, his or her appointment, the chief forest ranger would not have any career options. Potentially, after 20 years of state service, for instance, that individual could find themselves, by no fault of their own, unemployed. Under the current law, any person or potential candidate for this position risks losing employment. They could lose their jobs, their seniority, and not to mention their retirement benefits. This situation could very much limit the pool of future potential candidates. If one were thinking about it and you were asked to become the chief forest ranger, this is something you'd really want to take under consideration, especially if you had a lot of years left within the department. So if you're trying to recruit people from within the ranks, this is a very determining factor. So what this bill does is provide similar protocols afforded to the chief of the Maine Warden Service, the chief of the Maine Marine Patrol, where should they not be reappointed or removed by their appointing authority. The bill only aligns the chief forest ranger position with other folks in similar positions in other departments. So I'm willing to entertain any questions you may have. However, I suspect you will receive better or more accurate information from department staff. They are, I'm sure, better prepared to respond to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions for Representative Schofield? Seeing none, thank you. And I see Patty Cormier on my screen. You must be here to speak on behalf of the department.
I sure am.
Welcome.
Good to see everyone this morning. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and other honorable members of the committee. I'm Patty Cormier, Director of the Maine Forest Service of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I am testifying on behalf of the department in favor of LD 90. Thank you very much for Representative Schofield for your details and for sponsoring this bill. So, as Representative Schofield said, the state supervisor of the Forest Protection Division, more commonly referred to as the Chief Ranger, holds a major policy influencing position as outlined in Title V, Section 935. In this position, the Chief Forest Ranger can be appointed or removed by the appointing authority and serves at the authority's pleasure. The purpose of this act is to provide an option if the Chief Forest Ranger is either not reappointed after an election or is removed by the appointing authority, and if the Chief Forest Ranger came to the position from civil service. All major policy influencing positions require expertise and insights on relevant policy, and while such knowledge is specialized, it is not necessarily exceedingly rare. The role of the Chief Forest Ranger is different. It requires those things plus an array of technical skills and certifications held by relatively few people. And it's highly likely, therefore, that any pool of qualified candidates for the job will include people already serving with the Maine Forest Service in classified positions. As the law currently stands, in asking such candidates to accept the role, we must also ask them to take a significant gamble. To agree to serve at the pleasure of the appointing authority, they must be willing to put at risk the future civil service employment, as well as seniority, retirement, other rights to which uninterrupted service might have entitled them. As Director of the Bureau of Forestry and the appointing authority, I want to be able to recruit and retain the best qualified staff I can. That is always important and a special challenge when the universe of highly qualified candidates is likely small. I also want to ensure that positions in our Bureau of Forestry are fair and parallel to those of other agencies. The protections envisioned in this bill provide safeguards similar to those afforded to the Chief of the Maine Warden Service and Chief of Marine Patrol, should they not be reappointed or be removed by their appointing authority. It's our belief as a department that these changes will help recruit and retain the best qualified staff from a unique pool of candidates. We are confident this is a fair and reasonable step for the committee to support and the right thing to do. I am available to answer any questions, and we certainly will be available at the work session to answer questions as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative McCray?
Yes, this sort of probably is obvious. The appointing authority would be the department in this case?
Yeah, by statute outlines the Director of Forestry.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, thank you. And I do have one other speaker on my list for testifying at the moment, and I don't see him on my screen.
He has decided not to testify.
He has decided not to testify. Okay.
Sent in written testimony.
He sent written testimony. Is there anyone else, Cheryl?
There is not.
Okay, then I will close the hearing on LD 90 and I will turn to Karen Neto.
Good morning. So why are you turning to me, Senator?
I thought I thought we were going to go over committee guidelines.
Yes, I'm just giving you a hard time. So I was just looking for the email that I sent you all because I'm sure you all have the committee rules of procedure at your fingertips. I emailed it to you probably on Monday because we thought we might do this on Tuesday, but we sort of ran out of time. So please let me know if you want me to resend those to you. But there were two files, the model committee rules of procedure, and then there was an addendum that has to do with COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I think, Karen, if you could highlight some of the ones relating to COVID. I think the other ones are pretty straightforward, even though we do have some new members on here. I think they will be pretty self-explanatory, so they can look at those. But the COVID rules may be a little different about, especially so, later on if we're in person meetings. Yep.
Okay. So for those of you that are new to the legislature, the committee, each biennium, at the beginning of each biennium, the presiding officers establish procedures for public hearings, work sessions, and confirmation hearings. And so the committee needs to go over these, and then the committee by a majority vote can amend those model committee rules of procedure. And then what happens is the chairs sign, you all take a vote. If the majority supports any amendments, the chairs sign it, send it to presiding officers, and then they take a look at all of the committee, joint standing committee rules of procedure, and they approve them or they don't approve any some of the amendments. So anyway, and then once that happens, assuming that they will approve what you vote on today, then the clerk has a copy and they will be posted somewhere. So I'll just start right from the top here. The chair presides. The Senate chair presides, and in the Senate chair's absence, the House chair shall preside. And then thereafter, as the need may arise, the chair shall alternate between members from each chamber in the sequence of their appointment to the committee. In terms of a quorum is 7
Karen,
members.
on that.
You want me to not do this?
Oh, no. Just on that procedure, I think what the way we were looking at doing it, that would be then Senator Black, then Senator Hall, because we don't really necessarily know how everybody was appointed. But just so you know who the first four are, in case Representative O'Neill and I are not here, it would go to Senator Black, and then the Representative Hall, and then after that, you can arm wrestle for it if you don't know who was appointed next. But anyway.
Okay. So in terms of quorum, a quorum is 7 members of the committee, one of whom must be a senator, and a quorum must be present to start a meeting. And if there isn't a senator, there's a couple options for you. I won't go over that. It's very rare, but you could seek authorization from the president of the Senate. So it's important to note that a quorum is not required to continue a meeting. So once you start the meeting, have a quorum, and then you kind of lose your quorum, it doesn't matter. It's fine to continue with the meeting. And a quorum is not required for a vote on a motion to adjourn. And I guess the clerks have been told that, I know staff different committees, and I know, I think this committee in particular, it was common to get a motion to adjourn. In other committees, they never did that. So, but for now, in this virtual environment, the clerks are looking for a motion to adjourn at the end of every meeting, so that they there's like a clear cutoff from when they stop the audio internet broadcast and the YouTube broadcast. So just going over to the COVID addendum, it's important to note that in order for a member to be considered present, they're present if you're in attendance using the electronic platform utilized for the meeting, which is Zoom, and when the member's identity is visually verifiable on the electronic platform. You're considered absent from the meeting when the member is not in attendance using the electronic platform. And that even means even if you're in the committee room here at the State House campus, if you're physically in the room, you still need to be linked in with the electronic platform. Or you're considered absent if your identity is not visually verifiable. So like for voting, for example, we like all the committee members to be visually, we can see you, and also to be able to hear you, so we are sure what your vote is. Any questions about that? So moving on to number 3, attendance. It is each committee member's responsibility to notify the committee clerk whenever the member is unable to attend a public hearing or work session. So that way the chairs know that this, you have something else planned or a conflict, and it's not just technical difficulties preventing you from participating in the meeting. As far as, I'll skip over the scheduling. That's something that the analyst works closely with the chairs, but if you do look at the committee rules, there are some requirements for about posting and advertising of public hearings, etc. Not much has changed there, other than obviously the clerk can't post a schedule, or she can, but no one's going to see the hard copy of the schedule outside the committee door. So one of the addendums is that that will be posted on the committee's webpage, a weekly schedule. Questions of order, there's really no change here. The presiding chair shall decide all questions of order subject to appeal to the committee, and the chair's ruling stands unless overruled by a majority of the committee membership. I probably can count maybe on 1 or 2 fingers, having seen this in my 20 years at HOPLA, and hopefully this does not happen often. Smoking and eating restrictions, obviously it's a little different. I know some committees do often amend this section of the committee rules. I'll leave it obviously it's up to you. During public hearings, committee members may consume water only. During work sessions, committee members may consume beverages. If a work session goes past 6 p.m., the committee co-chairs may permit members to consume food and beverages. I have noticed that some committees have just amended the rules to say when participating remotely, committee members may only consume food or beverages while off screen. So I don't know if that's something that this committee wants to do.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that I think we have to address. Right at the moment, of course, we're not physically in the room, but if we are physically in the room and still need to wear a mask, then there's basically no eating or drinking because you'd have to take your mask off to do that. So until such time as masks aren't allowed, there would be no eating or drinking in the chambers. But traditionally, this committee has allowed snacking because, as you heard Representative Dunphy say this morning, that as a past member of the committee, she will at some point bring us snacks. And so there's always snacks behind us too, which we've always been able to go and get and eat while we've been in committee, which was, I would expect, would continue as long as, you don't have to wear a mask. And as for eating and drinking, in front of the committee, even on screen, we ask that if you're going to do that, either, move to the side or just turn your screen off, because it can be rather distracting with somebody with a cup up in front of their face, or they're sitting there taking a bite of sandwich, which we have seen. So I would recommend that as one of our committee rules that we adopt, that any eating and drinking can be done off screen, just kind of out of, respect to everybody else and decorum. So as far as the committee members are concerned. So that's where it is on eating and drinking. Is there anything else, Karen?
Nope.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, do you want to sort of move in any amendments now and kind of do it like we did for the budget work session, where see if there's any objection, and if there isn't, then it's unanimous, but
yeah,
not,
what I thought I might let you do is add those little things that we just talked about, make sure everybody has them, and then next meeting, we just quickly at the end of the meeting or sometime during the meeting, just vote on the rules as amended. So that way everybody gets a chance to look at them, because sometimes as you sit here and talk about them, we talk about them, it's kind of tough to do that. But I would suggest that as certainly amendment under the eating and drinking part. So if you could put that down as a suggested amendment, and then we'll just vote on everything next time. We can vote on that separately, of course, and then the whole package. That's about the only major change, I think.
Okay, so I can, I'll do an amended version and send it out to you, and then you can vote at a later time. Okay.
Right.
I see Cheryl has a few hands up.
Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
Thank you, Karen. I did want to let you know that I did send Karen's email. I resent those rules to you, so you should have gotten those about 15 minutes ago.
Okay.
Thanks.
And chat, what are we going to do? We don't have it today because I turned it off. In SLG, they don't want it on because of the attendees are chatting and talking about things totally different from what we're talking about. So I turned it back on, but once we're in the Zoom meeting, I cannot it won't come back on. So do you want it left on with the understanding that you might get some people saying things they shouldn't, or what would you like?
I would prefer at the moment to leave it on, because that's how I have been conversing, especially with you and Karen, and occasionally another committee member. And I think let's just try leaving it on, and if it gets unruly, then we will have to shut it off. But one of the things I say at the beginning of each meeting is that the chat is to be used for certain things, and it's not just a general thing to go back and forth. And at least in this committee, I haven't seen any problems with it yet, nor in IF&W. And Representative Landry, I don't think we've seen any problems there, have we, on using the chat and people saying things that, you know, they shouldn't. So I would prefer to have it on to begin with, and we'll see how it goes. If we have problems, we can.
I did find it difficult communicating with you without the chat. So.
Yes, well, we were trying to communicate back and forth on email, and you know, and we're both trying to pay attention here, whereas chat at least pops right up, and you know, so.
Right. All right. So the next time we meet, it should pop up.
Okay, it'll be on.
Yes.
Are there any other questions or comments along these lines? Karen or Cheryl, do you have anything else for us today?
Oh, yeah. We have to go through the committee rules of procedure. So let's go back to that. One thing that I skipped over, it's on page 2 of the model rules. It's about, it's not uncommon for committees when you're in a public hearing to go directly into work session. So if you look at number 4, it's paragraph F. It actually says the committee may not hold a hearing or conduct a work session for which notice has not been posted. I guess one could, you know, I don't know if you want to amend this, because one could argue that if the hearing has been advertised and you go right into work session, the public will know that because they are observing the hearing. But I have seen other committees where they explicitly state, except the committee may by unanimous vote, unanimous, interesting, not majority, may move directly into a work session on a bill after its public hearing without notice. So something for you to think about.
Yeah, I would certainly, I mean, because we've done it in this committee before, go right into work session just by a vote, but I don't believe we've ever said by unanimous vote, but I would be willing to bet that 99% of the time that we've done that, it was unanimous vote. I can't think of any off the top of my head when somebody said, no, it's not, but once in a while there may be. So I would leave it up to the committee. What are your thoughts on that? Should it be unanimous or just majority? Majority? Just kind of wave your hand at me if you think it should be majority vote. All right. How about, should it be unanimous vote? So we got a couple people saying unanimous. So we got some of each. Somebody want to say something? Bill Pluker, you've got your mic unmuted, so I thought you might want to say something here.
I was just trying to put my thoughts together. It seems like it's, in most cases, we want to make sure that if there is deliberation that's needed, that every person is comfortable having the chance to think about it and do additional research if they want to. We don't want to force any one person into taking a vote they're not prepared for. So perhaps that was the argument.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with either way, but Representative Schofield.
Yeah, I agree with Representative Fluker that, and I can't remember a time when it wasn't unanimous. So on those rare times that it wouldn't be, I think it's something to consider. So I think unanimous is a proper approach. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Then if no one really objects, then
Representative McRae.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Representative McRae.
No problem. I think that's the direction you were going anyway. I think that occasionally there might be somebody, one of us, that would say, geez, if I just had another couple of weeks, I've got somebody that really wants to do some research for me. That could happen. And like you said, 99.9% of the time, we're going to be unanimous anyway. So,
yep. Yeah, it's pretty usually obvious that if we're going to go that way, that it's unanimous. So,
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So, Karen, if you want to add that to that, unanimous vote of the committee.
Okay. So now I'm on the third page, item 7, which is procedures for public hearings. And then I also, the addendum obviously has some items. People aren't required to provide 20 copies anymore because we're doing everything electronic. Just a friendly reminder that questions must be addressed through the chair and must be asked orally only by members of the committee present at the hearing. And then it's a good reminder. People have been pretty good about this, that because often the chair and the clerk will say, you know, so-and-so is up. It's always good to have that person announce their affiliation and what town they're from. And I think for the most part, folks have been doing that. The only sort of amendment that you may want to consider is in paragraph E of the model rules about sponsors asking questions on their own bills. So right now, a committee member who is the primary sponsor of an LD and any member who testifies for or against the bill ordinarily should refrain from questioning other witnesses. I've seen committees approach this different ways, but some committees do allow for this if the chair does allow it. So
I think traditionally this committee has allowed for sponsors and co-sponsors to participate in the questioning. And I personally don't have any problem with that. I mean, because a lot of times, as you've seen, many of the bills that we have sponsored to this point have been department bills anyway. And, you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense if we're not allowed to answer or ask questions, especially on a bill that may not necessarily really be ours. So I would recommend that we put in there that they are allowed to question and participate in the discussion. Is there any thoughts against that? I mean, as I say, we've done that right along, so I don't see any hands up or anything. So yeah, I think if we want to put that in, Karen. I would go back to the questions though. And I don't know that it's really in rules, but oftentimes there had been a 3-question rule that per person. And I think what I would recommend as the chair, I don't limit people to number of questions, but what I may do is as an individual that's asking questions, if you look up and if there's many hands up there, what I will probably do is limit the questions that you can ask in a row. Not that I won't come back to you, but rather than monopolizing, asking 6 or 7 questions in a row, I may, after a couple questions, if there, as I say, only if there's other hands up, just turn to other people. So I just would like committee members to be aware of that. So I don't know that we have to have that in the rules, but I'm just stating that is the way that, at least when I'm running the committee, Maggie may have a different approach on that, but that's probably what I will do. So just to try to get everybody to make sure they get the answer or ask their question, so I'll get it answered. Okay, continue, Karen.
sure. So, and one more thing under procedures for public hearings. I noticed that other committees have added an amendment to basically say that attendee, because we're all like either in our home office or at home or, you know, not on the State House complex, that attendees and members are not permitted to hold or display signs, posters, placards, or props in the committee room during a public hearing or while participating remotely. I think props has always been sort of not allowed in the committee room setting, but it may be something that you want to add, given that people are often testifying from their homes. And
right, as you notice, I usually say, sometimes I probably forget, but that, you know, Maggie and I are the background police. So as well as policing the background, you know, I also say that there's no props or posters or whatever to be held up. And there's no screen sharing actually either if we don't know it ahead of time and have not approved of it ahead of time. So if someone gets up to testify and then clicks over to screen share, I think several committees that I've heard from other chairs, they're not allowing that either. So as regular testimony. because we wouldn't be doing that in committee either. You wouldn't get up there and pull out your computer and try to link in and do a PowerPoint for us if we weren't aware of it. So I would think that we might want that in there also.
Okay, so I can do that for both public hearings and work sessions, kind of add that that language.
Right, without prior approval of the committee chairs, I think if we put that in there, that way if we're aware and think it's something that would add, then that would be fine.
So I'm not going to go over reports. I guess as far as voting goes, if members are not present for the vote, the bill must be held in committee until the following periods have expired. So I think there are some amendments to that. A member who was absent at the time of the vote and later registers that member's vote with the clerk shall register that member's vote in the same manner as authorized under paragraph C. So I take that back. I guess it's still, if you're absent, you have up until noon the second business day following the vote to register that with the clerk. And then I think it's often the case as later, although this isn't really a typical session, but later in the session, presiding officers may shorten those deadlines to get committee members to vote in a shorter time period to get things moving along. So, but who knows what the end of this session will bring. Cheryl?
Cheryl, you have a point along these lines, I'm sure.
Yeah, it actually doesn't come to me anymore. It goes right to your presiding officer. So if you're absent, you would contact your providing officer with your vote, and then they make the vote for you through the LIO office, and then their office sends it back to me so that I can record it.
Okay.
You don't come to me at all this year.
So then we go to either the president or the speaker.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Okay, Karen, continue.
I think that's basically it. You know, there's some committees have been adding an amendment that the use of the committee room shall be in accordance with the direction of the presiding officers. So that may be sort of getting to, you know, requiring wearing masks and, you know, a limit on the number of people in a committee room, et cetera. So there's kind of like just additional requirements on the use of the committee room these days.
Yep, okay. Representative Fluker?
That was an accident.
Raising your hand.
I won't even make I won't even make a comment on that.
Yeah, I think I just hit on some of the key points. So
okay. Yeah, so if we can have that all with the amendments and stuff out to us, that way everybody will have a chance to look at it, and we'll try to vote on it next Tuesday. Okay?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Mine's not an accident. Just a couple things. Remember, I'm not sure if you folks understand that I'm not allowed to send to home emails anymore. All legislative emails have to go to your legislative email address now. I just wanted to make sure I let you know. If you're having trouble with your legislative email address, I do have the IT help desk phone numbers that you can call, and they can help you fix those. I know they helped Senator Dill fix his. So if you are having problems, I can give you that phone number. The Zoom links that you're still not getting or are getting lost, if you type in the subject area, it'll say panelist. You guys are always panelists. So if you look for that and the date, you should be able to find your Zoom link. It is also sent out 1 hour before your meeting. So today it was sent out at 8 o'clock, and Zoom does that automatically. Now we all know that Zoom's not perfect. So hopefully it still gets to you, but you have to be able to get on your legislative email first. And then if, and this is probably mostly for Representative O'Neill and Senator Dill, but if you could send me names of people that you want invited for work sessions.
Cheryl,
yes.
I'll be working with the chairs on that list.
Oh, okay.
I'll be sending you that list.
Oh, okay, great, great. That way I can get that sent out as well for the Zoom link. Thank you.
Representative Hall.
Yes, thank you. I had a question or about the presentations from earlier this morning. I don't remember that we discussed that in any of our leads, and I just was curious as to, why that was brought up. That was very good if you was interested in history or whatnot, but I also found some of the comments that was made I felt kind of biased, and I just wanted to bring that up as to where that information came from and why it was presented to our committee.
Representative O'Neill.
Sure. Thanks, Representative Hall. And I'm sorry if I didn't do a good job communicating about it. I think that we spoke about, Senator Dill and I spoke about it when we had meetings a few times. But just some context is we've had the permanent commission established and meeting this summer. I met one of those people through that process. A lot of organizations over the last year, especially after the death of George Floyd, have been just thinking about conversations that they conduct and kind of working that in. I think it should have been happening anyway, but I just thought it was a nice opportunity for us to just kind of frame our conversations and bring a little bit of a different perspective. So I'm sorry that I didn't communicate well about it before and that you felt surprised by it. I can do a better job with that next time.
Yeah, and I think our chairs and leads meetings sometimes aren't gelling together as well as they could be.
Okay.
So.
Well, hopefully we got this rectified as far as getting the Zoom links going and whatnot. And just a comment to Cheryl was this morning, I received your email after I had emailed you the second time. The first one came through after the second one came through. So I think that's something to do with the internet service. So, no problem there. Just that's the way it happens. Thank you.
Representative Underwood.
Yes, as far as that, I had a problem with a lot of that history stuff. I think it was all irrelevant to this committee, and it was a bunch of propaganda put out by the left in order to influence a lot of people that didn't need that material in their system or to listen to that stuff. This is not the proper venue for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative McCray.
Yeah, regarding the Zoom links, Cheryl's probably tired of seeing my name pop up saying I didn't get it. Early on, before I went to my presentation in HHS, I had it. Okay, when I came back, it was gone. So it's just a state of flux, and it's like, oh God. So we'll get it straightened around.
Yeah.
Just going back to Representative Hall's comment, I think initially, Cheryl and I were just meeting with Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill, because I think there were some questions about whether, chairs and leads meetings should be open or there should be public notice. So I was you know, really cautioning the chairs. I don't know if we're going to get dinged on that. And then the chairs said, okay, well, we just need to proceed with having chairs and leads. So I think that the briefing this morning was scheduled, you know, very early. So, you know, my apologies for you and Senator Black not being part of that conversation, but I think that's why you weren't aware that, you know, it was scheduled.
See, Karen threw herself under the bus this time instead of me doing it, so. Representative Osher.
Thank you, Chair Senator Dill. I would just like some definitions. So you're talking about chairs and leads meeting, and I know what a chair is because on the description of our committee, it says chair.
Right.
Next to your name.
So the chair is the Senate chair and the House chair of the committees that are in majority. So at the moment, of course, it's the Democrats. So it's both of us are Democrats. And the leads then are the top people on the committee from the minority. This time both being Republicans. So the leads therefore are Senator Black and Representative Hall. So when the chairs and leads meet, all we do is we basically meet to discuss scheduling and that type of thing. That's what we do during our meetings. Is nothing of substance as far as we don't discuss the internal bills, that type of thing. We meet solely for the purpose of trying to schedule upcoming meetings, or in this case, upcoming topics like we have. I think next week there's a discussion on climate change. The department is going to do that, and how it fits in with agriculture, conservation, and forestry. So there are occasional, and in the past we've also had people come in to discuss things on bills that we have, some larger discussions rather than just a strict 3-5 minute testimony. So it's the chairs and leads that do that.
Thank you very much. I just did not know what a lead was, and it's not listed on our committee, I'm pointing over to my other computer, my other screen. On the website that talks about who are the members of our committee, it identifies who the chairs are, but it doesn't identify the leads. Thank you for letting me know that. And so how often do the chairs and leads meet?
We meet Tuesday morning at 8:30 just before the meeting. And that's to talk about schedule for the week and upcoming schedules as things change. As you can well imagine, people want a bill done on a certain day that we can't because they can't make it, or so there are scheduling changes all the time. Not to mention we're trying to schedule out, as you see the monthly calendar you get from Karen, and each time we meet, we discuss that calendar, and even the whole month can change slightly. So. Karen.
Thank you very much.
So I really appreciate Representative Osher's question, because after having been here for so long, you just sometimes make assumptions that everyone understands the legislative lingo. So I really do appreciate questions like that. And, do not hesitate to contact me. Email is probably the best way to reach me these days if you have any sort of process questions like that. And one thing that I didn't go over in the committee rules, but and it'll come up organically during a work session maybe, but I did want to emphasize that if a committee votes and the report is not unanimous, so there's a majority report and a minority report, there may be multiple minority reports. I just want to emphasize that the committee and me as the analyst, we have to know what your report is at the time of the vote. Often, sometimes the person making the motion may not have their motion fully developed in their mind, and they'll say, Karen, I'll get back to you on whatever my amendment may be. You really need to articulate whatever your amendment is at the work session. So that's something that I just wanted to emphasize with the committee.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Representative Underwood and and Rep. Paul sharing their thoughts. And I just want to reiterate, I guess I could have done a better job communicating. I did want to just note that it is typical for us to have different kinds of briefings. You know, we heard from AgCom. We're going to hear from the department on what the Climate Council's work is doing, and by nature, a speaker is going to bring whatever perspective they have and share that in their briefing. That's what industry did when they came and spoke. So I just wanted to note it's what it was about was sharing perspectives, and we're all free to, you know, take it or leave it, but that's really what the briefing was about. So thanks.
Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Osher brought up a point about understanding who the leads are and who on the various committees. I think if you look at the committee lists that are generated, there's a little asterisk, tiny little asterisk beside the names of the leads on the various committees. That may be helpful to you as you look at those lists. That's all I was going to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Osher.
Thank you, Chair Senator Dill. I really appreciate that we had the presentations today. I found especially interesting the mention of the Park Service and how their original charge made this assumption that they were preserving lands that were devoid of people, and to do that they had to make them devoid of people. I worked for the Forest Service for years before I went back to get my PhD in soil carbon storage and forest oils. And certainly the Forest Service manages land as the Park Service manages land. And initially their charge didn't include thinking about the people who lived there before it became a federal government land to manage. And so I really appreciated that to hear that the Park Service has someone who's, or Ivy Museums, you know, has half the job as relationship with the Native peoples, and that they're partnering with the Park Service. So that was, I haven't been at the Forest Service since 1991, so it's been a long time, but it was really nice to hear that there's federal agencies that are taking this into account. So thank you very much. I enjoyed learning today.
Thank you. So Karen, is that pretty well it on the procedures and that type of thing?
Yeah, I always have one more thing to add, sorry. On work sessions, I just wanted, you know, and I have talked with chairs and leads, I believe, briefly about this, but it is a bit unusual in this electronic environment because we have to send Zoom invites to participants. So usually people are just in the room and committee members. I mean, typically a work session is between the analyst and the committee has a discussion among themselves, and you know, you deliberate on the bill, and then it's at the chair's discretion as to whether you're going to call someone up from the audience to the analyst desk to answer questions or whatever. In this case, I sort of have to think about that ahead of time of who we should invite to work sessions, and I think it'll be pretty standard that we invite the sponsor of the bill. I mean, Senator Dill is the chair of the committee. So for example, the first 3 bills I think were his. So obviously that's taken care of, but and usually there'll be at least one primary person from the agency that the bill affects. So they would be invited. But what I will do is create a list of who I kind of heard should be invited from the public hearing, and then I'll run that by the chairs and leads, or just the chairs, I don't know, and then I'll give that list to Cheryl so that we have people who are invited to participate in the work sessions. And if there's someone else you feel that you really need to hear from, the committee can always just table the bill, and then we'll just have a subsequent work session.
Representative McCray.
Yeah, very much along the same line. Perhaps it might work, like, for example, if I had a bill before the committee and there was somebody that she might not have gleaned, oh, this would be an important person to have at the work session, if I notified Karen or the chairs, probably the chairs, that I would like to invite Representative Underwood to be be at this particular committee meeting. Of course, she would be at this one, but to see them there work session, with plenty of notice, perhaps they could be invited.
Yep. Thank you. Other questions or comments on procedures? There's only one other thing that I would say, and it's not really procedures, but it's just kind of a heads up. As you know, we had 5 confirmation votes this week. Other committees are all doing the same. So at some point in the next, probably the end of February or possibly the first week of March, I believe the Senate is going to try to convene to take up all those confirmations. And I really don't know what that's going to mean on committees, because if all the senators are in Augusta, because we got to be there in person to vote, and we're actually sitting in session, I don't know how we could have a quorum, because we won't have any senators present on a Zoom and if we had work sessions and we thought we were going to vote. But I'm just giving everybody a heads up that at some point in time, hopefully it's not Tuesday the 23rd, because I think we got 10 work sessions that day. But all of a sudden a day may have to get on hold. We've asked the question of leadership, how is that going to work? And I mean, I don't even know what day it's going to be, because they got to send a poll out to everybody, you know, both, you know, all 35 senators to see when they can meet. So it's just a heads up. So with that, is there anything else before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Seeing nothing, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Representative O'Neill moved we adjourn, and Representative Landry seconded it.